What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto shocked everyone at the Chunin exams harem? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. After finally getting Jeriah to agree to train him, Naruto bounced around in excitement before asking him, so what are we gonna work on first? Arrow Senin, a super cool jutsu. Jeriah sighed before he simply replied, no Brad. First we are going to be working on the basics by using the shadow clone jutsu to speed up fixing your terrible skills in the basics before we do anything else. Naruto gained a tick mark at first at the not so subtle jab before wondering aloud, how is the shadow clone supposed to help me train Arrow Senin? Jeriah followed that up by simply saying to Naruto, I'll show you how Brat make one clone and have it follow the one I will make. He and Naruto then performed said jutsu and had them go out of visual distance and deeper into the forest that surrounded the training field. A short while later Naruto pointed at him and shouted in indignation, what the hell Arrow Senin, you pushed me down a cliff you bastard. Before realizing what he just said and then saying in confusion, wait, how the heck do I know this? That's one of the special characteristics of the shadow clone as well as one of the reasons the jutsu was created. Jiraiya explained. Naruto then remembered his earlier fight with Zabuza before asking, but if the shadow clone jutsu can be used like this then why bother with other types of clones? Jiraiya simply grinned before saying, finally a decent question from you Brad. That remark earned him a, hey, from his student before continuing with his explanation. To put it simply, each type of clone has advantages and disadvantages, which for the most part are tied to the element or lack thereof when using one. He explained further upon seeing Naruto's confused face. Much like the elements they use, each clone has its own special property. Fire clones create a small explosion and burn any nearby enemies if they are dispelled by an enemy attack. They can also be used to create a smokescreen by dispelling them, but if they are hit by a water jutsu then these effects usually don't happen. There is also the problem that if they are too close to comrades when they are dispelled they are just as likely to hurt them along with the enemy. Wind clones are usually a little faster than the original and will cut up the enemy if they are dispelled by them at close range, but that speed doesn't come without cost as they are dispelled very easily and the wind chakra that powers them can be turned on the user by using a fire jutsu causing them to explode. Lightning clones like wind clones are a little faster than the original, but upon being dispelled instead of cutting the enemy at close range they shock them. This is even more pronounced if the enemy destroyed the clone using a metal weapon, which are kinda necessary in our line of work. However, if the weapon that destroyed the clone is coated in wind chakra then the lightning clone won't shock the enemy that dispelled the clone. It also to a limited extent has the same problem that the fire clone has in the fact that it can harm comrades as well as the enemy. Earth clones are much sturdier and harder to dispel than other types of clones as well. The fact that water jutsu have a very low chance actually doing any type of damage against them. However, they are much slower than the original, and there's the fact that lightning jutsu will cut through them with minimal effort. Also, they are a little more chakra intensive than other types of clones. And finally, water clones in the hands of a skilled user cost very little chakra compared to the other clones, as well as the fact that they slip through things like grates and fences, and in the hands of a skilled user can even be laced with things like poison to coat the enemy with when they are dispelled. But those traits don't come without a cost as they are very easy to dispel, even more so than the wind clone. They are also easily defeated by earth jutsu. They are also much weaker than most other clones when it comes to strength and are heavily dependent on the local climate. Jiraiya explained wisely. Naruto eyed Jiraiya with suspicion before saying, first, who are you and what have you done with the real Arrow Senin, and secondly, what do you mean by water clones are dependent on the climate? Jiraiya bopped him on the head before shouting in indignation, what's that supposed to mean, brat? A tick mark showing up on his head. Naruto simply shouted back, you never acted this seriously before nursing the bump on his aching head. Jiraiya instantly retorted, what do you mean I've never acted this seriously before? I'm always serious. Growing another tick mark on his head. Naruto said while looking at his teacher with a deadpan expression. Jiraiya mumbled under his breath something about brats not respecting their elders. Jiraiya then decided to get back to the topic at hand, saying, to answer your earlier question, Sweden clones are dependent on the local environment because they draw not only chakra but moisture from the air around them, making them hard to use in places like Suna and Iwi due to the dry climate. This causes the Sweden clone to become much more sluggish and less flexible. Naruto then asked, So where do shadow clones fit into all this? What kind of special abilities do they have? Glad you asked, Brad. Jeriah said with a grin. Then he said, shadow clones are unique in that they don't use elemental chakra as a sort of medium, so while they don't have special abilities when they dispel at least ones that are immediately apparent, this also means that they have special properties that none of the other clones do. Naruto asked curiously, like what kind of properties? Jeriah sighed before saying, I was getting there, Brad, don't interrupt me. So anyway, the shadow clone, in addition to the previously shown memory return ability, is also able to use more types of jutsu. Naruto then asked, what kind of jutsu? What did I say about interrupting Brad? Jeriah reprimanded before continuing, elemental clones, while having special abilities when they are dispelled, also have the disadvantage of being able to use only the element of the jutsu that created, so fire clones can only use fire jutsu, so on and so forth. While this results in the elemental clones being less chakra intensive, it also means that if, say, a lightning wielder decided to go against a wind wielder, the wind wielder would have the advantage in terms of clones, as the elemental clones can only the type of chakra they were created with. Jeriah then explained, shadow clones, however, do not have this disadvantage, as they can use any type of jutsu due to them being made from neutral chakra, which, while yes makes them more chakra intensive, also makes them more versatile in a fight. At this point, Naruto was very eager to start his training, so he asked Jeriah, so do we start training now, Arrow Sennin? Not yet, Brad. I have one more thing I need you to do before we start. After Jeriah said that, he pulled out a piece of paper, to which upon seeing this Naruto questioned, what's a piece of paper gonna do for my training? Jeriah explained, this is going to allow us to see what your chakra nature is. My chakra what? Naruto said, completely confused. Didn't you learn this stuff in the academy? Jeriah asked, not liking where this conversation was headed. The teachers didn't teach me much at the academy, with sole exception of Iruka-sensei, and many of them would kick me out of the important lessons. Heck, the only reason I know how to throw shuriken and kunai correctly was because Iruka-sensei showed me how after I nearly hit him and a few other students while trying to throw them. Naruto explained, a miniature storm cloud seemingly forming over his head, while remembering how the instructors would go out of their way to make sure he didn't learn anything. Jeriah meanwhile was not pleased. Actually, scratch that, not pleased was an understatement, he was downright furious. It's like those instructors were trying to get him killed. He thought as he tried to calm himself down, as he knew that he had a lot more work to do now that this new information had been revealed to him. Jeriah then sighed and then said, well, I guess we got our work cut out for us then, Brad. After how much his new student had been hindered in the academy, Naruto was gonna have his work cut out for him, as he only had a month to catch up while his peers had at least 4 years to do, and he was gonna have to help him improve even more than that. Jeriah then decided to lighten the mood by explaining, this is chakra paper. It is used to test a person's chakra natures. If you are a fire affinity, the paper will burn, wind affinity will split in half, lightning affinity will crumple, earth affinity will crumble, and water affinity it will soak. He then pushed some chakra into his paper, which crumbled before what remained started burning. Now you try, Jeriah told Naruto before handing a piece of paper to his blonde student. Naruto obliged this, and the result was that the paper split in half, followed by the upper half crumpling and the lower half crumbling. Jeriah then nodded in approval, saying, it seems you have a primary wind affinity with a secondary lightning and earth affinities. Jeriah thought afterwards, though that does beg the question on where the earth affinity came from. Minato, I know, had a lightning affinity and Kushina a wind affinity, so it might be the Kyuubi's doing. Jeriah decided to look into it at a later date before saying, alright, I want you to create 200 shadow clones and have them do these following exercises. We'll do Arrow Sennin, Naruto said happily, and complied with the trademark crossed finger seal before shouting, shadow clone jutsu. After this had happened, 200 clones appeared in the training ground they were using. With the task of creating 200 shadow clones now done, Jeriah divided them into doing certain exercises. 3 groups of 20 clones would do the leaf cutting, the leaf crumpling, or the leaf crumbling exercises respectively, as while Jeriah only knew earth and fire ninjutsu, it wouldn't hurt for his student to get a head start on his training. 20 clones would read as much as they could from chakra theory to tactics, 20 more clones would work on shuriken jutsu. 30 clones would work on various taijutsu katas, 30 more clones would work on basic chakra control exercises, and the final 40 would work on calligraphy. Wait, what? Arrows Sennin, what's the point of calligraphy? I know how to read and write already. Naruto wondered, complained, not knowing in the slightest how this was gonna help him in his upcoming fight against Neji. Calligraphy is meant to prepare you in learning a very powerful art if it is used in the right hands. Jeriah explained before continuing, it may also give you an edge in your fight with that Hyuga boy. Fuinjutsu was also one of the things his clan was famous for, not that he knows that right now. Jeriah added mentally. Naruto grumbled under his breath, clearly not happy about it, but complied anyway before asking, so what am I supposed to do then? I want you to do these exercises since that is the only thing your shadow clones can't help you with. Jeriah replied. With those words Naruto began his month of training, and to say he progressed quickly and that Jeriah was impressed would be an understatement. Within 2 days Naruto was already a quarter of the way done with the all 3 leaf exercises. He could reliably hit a stationary target 9 times out of 10 with throwing weapons. His taijutsu, which was once so bad that it more resembled a street brawler rather than a shinobi, was on par now with most average genin. And his handwriting had improved enough that Jeriah had deemed him ready to start learning fuinjutsu. If he continues to progress at this rate, I have no doubt that he will eventually surpass both me and Minato eventually. Jeriah thought before sighing sadly at the thought of his late student as he watched Naruto running around the training field, apparently attempting to increase how fast he could go sustainably. By the end of the first week, Naruto had improved dramatically from where he was a week ago. He had finished all 3 leaf exercises and was now working on the second stage of elemental chakra training, which was coding a kunai in elemental chakra, in this case wind, lightning, and earth. He also had increased his accuracy with throwing weapons considerably, as he could hit a moving target reliably 8 times out of 10, emphasis on the moving part, as that was a feat most genin could not accomplish reliably. Naruto's taijutsu had improved a lot as well, as now he could fight on a low Chunin level. He also had mastered the tree climbing and water walking techniques to a point where he could use them reliably in a fight. Finally there was fuinjutsu, where at the beginning Naruto was once grumbling about learning. Now he could not get enough of it, as he had taken to the art like a fish to water, and within 5 days was on a level where most mid-level Chunin weren't. Which admittedly there weren't many of them left, but it was still impressive considering it would take most people 8 months to a year to get to this level with the art, as Naruto could now produce medium quality sealing scrolls, as well as low-level restriction and chakra suppression seals. Geez, the kid is progressing faster in this than I thought he would. I was planning on giving him the notes to this jutsu after the exams, but with the rate he's progressing it might be warranted. Jeriah thought to himself before deciding that he would give Naruto the notes to a technique that even he hadn't been able to figure out to perform. Hey Brad. Jeriah called out to Naruto as said person stopped what he was doing and ran over to his teacher before saying, yes, Arrow Sennin. Jeriah's eye twitched at the name before he decided to mess with his student a little first. Well, I was gonna give you notes to a new jutsu, but since you keep insisting on calling me that name Brad, Naruto said almost immediately, I'll stop calling you that, just please give me the notes. Jeriah snickered to himself and did a little victory dance in his head before saying, easy there Brad, but just be careful, as this is a jutsu that is very difficult to perform but likewise is extremely powerful. As he handed Naruto the notes and a sealing scroll with 15 tri-pronged kunai that any veteran of the Third Shinobi World War would recall either in awe or from fear depending on which side of it they were on. Thanks Arrow Sennin, Naruto said cheekily. Damn Brad, Jeriah said grinning while shaking his head. As Naruto ran back to his spot, he stopped and turned towards Jeriah and asked, by the way, what is the name of this jutsu anyway? Jeriah simply replied, it's called the Hiraishin. Naruto then immediately went about trying to recreate the technique, which much to his frustration hit brick wall after brick wall as he attempted to learn it and decipher the seals that it was made of. As this cycle repeated itself for almost a week before he discovered the key by accident. As Naruto was still trying to figure out what he wasn't getting about his technique, a sudden gust blew over one of the books about sealing that he was reading. As Naruto went to pick up the book, he saw that it had flipped to the page about the reverse summoning seal. He thought this seal looked familiar for some reason before looking at one of the tri-pronged kunai he was carrying. To his surprise, the majority of the formula on the hilt of the kunai was exactly the same as the shortened version of the reverse summoning seal, mixed in with a blood seal as well as a minor beacon seal. I got it. Naruto shouted and jumped with joy before going to attempt to recreate the technique one more time. He placed the kunai on a stump in the middle of the training ground before walking to the edge of the training field as he channeled his chakra into one of the kunai in his hand and focused on the kunai he placed on the stump, and to his excitement he teleported to the kunai only to feel pain immediately afterwards when he overshot and crashed into a tree on the other end of the training ground. OWWW. Naruto moaned as he rubbed the back of his head in pain. Normally he would be upset by this, but right now he was too happy to care as he finally made some progress in this technique and immediately got up in order to start perfecting his new technique, though he also noted that he felt a little disoriented but thought that was probably because he had hit his head. Unbeknownst to Naruto, however, is that Jeriah, who was hiding in a tree, had seen the whole thing, was trying to pick his jaw up off the ground from his shock. When he finally recovered from his stupor, Jeriah thought, "The brat really did it. I always knew that he would be able to do it someday, but for him to be able to perform it so quickly is nothing short of astounding." As impressive as it was, Jeriah also mentally noted that if people knew that Naruto could perform this technique, then that would paint a huge target on his student's back, especially in certain villages, namely Iwa and to a lesser extent Kumo. Jiraiya planned to ask Naruto to not use the Hiraishin unless he had no other option, but decided to save that conversation for a later date as he let Naruto celebrate his breakthrough. Over the course of the second and third week, Naruto worked to perfect the Hiraishin and could consistently use it without overshooting his target, but he still did so from time to time. But that wasn't to say that was all he had improved, as he perfected his usage of all three elemental kunai exercises. His taijutsu had improved to a solid mid-Chunin level. He was also learning the river running exercise, which was a lot like the water walking exercise, but instead of still water he would try to run against a river's current, turning it into half chakra control, half physical exercise, as he would have to try and control his movements against a force that was actively moving against him. His Shuriken jutsu had also improved to low Jonin level, as he could hit moving targets with precision and hit stationary targets while moving on a consistent basis. All the reading Naruto had his shadow clones do over the past 3 weeks had improved his mental capabilities a lot, as well as made him much better at coming up with strategies, as while he still wasn't the smartest shinobi it was also clear that he wouldn't hinder the team he was on, as he knew what he was doing now. Ninjutsu-wise, Jiraiya had taught Naruto 2 Earth-style jutsu, as that was the only chakra affinity the two of them shared, the two jutsus being the Earth Clone and Earth-style Caltrop Spike Field. The first jutsu is pretty self-explanatory, and the second was a defensive technique that caused small caltrop-sized spikes to rise about all around in a radius around the user. Said spikes were around 1 to 2 inches in height, making it so the enemy had to actively watch where they stepped lest they step on one of the spikes. This jutsu is also a stepping stone in learning another jutsu. Jiraiya was teaching Naruto to perform the Earth-style Earth Flow Spears technique. Fuinjutsu was where Naruto improved the most, however, as he learned to make medium-level restriction seals, low-level flash and beacon seals, as well as create explosive seals with about the same amount of firepower as a firecracker. So while they weren't the most powerful, these explosive seals were still powerful enough that you wouldn't want them on you or near you when they detonated. There was also an incident that occurred while Naruto was trying to learn the Earth Flow Spears technique. It rather funny or embarrassing depending on who you asked, as Naruto was attempting to learn, since for some reason the spikes themselves weren't appearing, though it seemed to be a lucky break in disguise, as will be shown. Naruto was visibly frustrated at the fact that the technique had no spikes, which was the whole point of the jutsu, so in his frustration he attempted to try the jutsu again, but this time he sent the chakra in the wrong direction on the ground, so instead going in the direction he was facing, said jutsu, which thankfully didn't have spikes on the tips, launched Naruto screaming in the opposite direction towards the edge of the training grounds. As Naruto got up, he saw that Jiraiya was on the ground turning blue because he was laughing so hard at what happened. During the last week of the training month that was left to them, Jiraiya decided that Naruto should spar against him so that Naruto could learn to use his newfound skills, which included the Earth-style Earth Flow Spears technique, which Naruto could finally perform. It also gave Jiraiya to teach his student in a more practical manner, as well as give him an ability to see what said skills were capable of doing in the right hands. He also had Naruto get used to fighting in terrain that was altered by the Earth-style Caltrop Spike Field technique, so that his student's new technique wouldn't end up hindering him if he were to use it in battle. It was also during that last week that an inevitable conversation happened between the young shinobi and his sensei. What do you mean I shouldn't use the Hiraishin during the exams? Naruto complained, clearly not liking that the jutsu he worked so hard on he was now unable to use during the exams. What did I say about not letting me finish, brat? Jeriah shouted at him before continuing. As I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted. You shouldn't use it right off the bat, you should keep it as an ace in case you need something to fall back on. It would be unwise to show it off too early. Jeriah explained, hoping Naruto would buy that excuse. I probably shouldn't tell you that Iwa and Kumo would most likely send assassins after you if they knew that you could perform the jutsu right now. Jeriah added mentally while worried what Naruto's reaction would be if his newest student found himself in an enemy bingo book. Thankfully for Jeriah, Naruto accepted this explanation, saying grumpily, "Yeah, I guess I get what you're saying," clearly not happy about not being able to kick Neji's ass with it. While Naruto didn't know it at that moment, the time for him to fight using the Hiraishin would come sooner than he had expected it would. As Naruto entered the stadium for his match against Neji, he saw his fellow shinobi in the stands. He saw Shikamaru, Kiba, Sakura, Lee, who was being helped along by Guy and Tenten. Even Hinata and Sasuke were there. He even saw Kakashi-sensei being on time for once. He saw the crowds cheering as well as people betting on the outcome of the matches, and he thought to himself, many of them are probably betting on me losing badly. Naruto frowned at this before smiling to himself and then thought, well then I guess a lot of people are gonna be losing money this match. He couldn't help but grin at the idea of proving the people of this village who disliked him wrong. Neji, however, noticed this too and decided to taunt, "What's the matter, loser, you that eager to be beaten by me?" He sneered. "Nah." Naruto brushed him off before countering, "I just can't help but think how awesome it's going to be to wipe that stupid look off of your face, especially after what you did to Hinata." As he put his hands behind his head and smiled even more while waiting for the match to start in an attempt to infuriate Neji even more. That did the trick, as Neji looked even angrier as he attempted to step towards Naruto. The Proctor Genma, if Naruto remembered his name correctly, put his hand on Neji's shoulder and said, "Save the fighting for after I start the match." He commented before continuing, "Are both contestants ready to begin?" he said to both boys. "Yes sir," Naruto said cheerily. "Let's get this over with," Neji said while still glaring at Naruto. "Hajime!" Genma shouted before jumping towards the edge of the arena. Naruto wasted no time. As soon as the match started, he threw a wind chakra-coated kunai at Neji. Neji at first thought nothing of this as he dodged and then smirked before activating Byakugan, only to frown at seeing Naruto with a smile on his own face before he said, "Earth style." Caltrop spike field before putting a palm on the ground. As he did this, many spikes rose from the ground seemingly at random. "How's this supposed to help you, loser?" Neji said, to which Naruto replied simply, "Just trying to even the odds a bit." The smile never leaving his face. Neji sneered before commenting, "Fate has already declared me the winner." Hoping to get a rise out of Naruto, only for his comment to backfire. Naruto simply grinned before saying, "Man. So you have some unlucky person named Fate doing everything for you. The more I think about it, the more it sounds like you're just a lazy bastard who can't do anything himself." Naruto taunted back. At this, Neji saw red as he charged Naruto in an attempt to strike his opponent down. Naruto for his part seemed weirdly calm about this, but just before Neji reached him, Naruto brought his hands into a hand seal and then an explosion happened. Neji was forced to break off his attack as Naruto jumped backwards. "When did you?" Neji questioned before realizing the answer, remembering when Naruto put his palm on the ground when he had performed his jutsu, but then wondered aloud, "How did you not set the tag off when you performed the jutsu?" Naruto for his part grinned and replied simply, "I'll tell you after the match. After all, a ninja never reveals their secrets." Although he did say answer Neji's question mentally, good thing the earth style Caltrop spike field jutsu can be cast by channeling chakra through one's feet as well as their hands. Neji for his part tried once again to get in close and attack Naruto, but the spikes on the ground were impeding his movement and it seemed that Naruto wasn't affected by this in any way. Naruto decided then to keep up his momentum as he placed his fingers into a cross-shaped hand seal and shouted Shadow Clone Jutsu, and just like that 10 shadow clones popped into existence and immediately charged the Hyuga prodigy. Neji dodged their attacks expertly and dispelled them one by one, though a few did get some lucky hits in. "That's all you got, loser, because if it is, then you might as well give up now." Neji taunted. Naruto's only response was to create more shadow clones as well as some earth clones and have them attack again. The end result was the same as last time, though it did require a little more effort on Neji's part. Though Neji now thought he knew what his opponent was trying to do now, as he narrowed his eyes and said, "I get what you're trying to do. You are trying to turn this into an endurance battle as you think you can outlast me." He then charged once again at Naruto, saying, "But I'll end this match now." Attempting to strike down Naruto once again. Naruto then slammed his hands on the ground and shouted Earth style. Earth flow spears as spears rose up from the ground and rocketed towards Neji, who was forced to break off his attack and dodge. As he did, however, he heard the telltale hissing sound of an explosive tag. He looked to see one of them on the spikes of Naruto's jutsu before jumping away just as it exploded. Neji after that couldn't help but say, "You really like baiting people into those explosive tags you got there," as he looked at his partially singed clothes. Naruto grinned and replied, "What can I say, I got the use of those explosive tags down to an art form," before throwing another kunai which Neji dodged. Somewhere in Tsuchi no Kuni, a certain mad bomber suddenly felt the urge to start crying tears of joy and the compulsive need to go to the nearest ramen stand, for he felt as though someone finally understood his art. His red-haired companion noticed him holding back his sniffles and couldn't help but ask, "What are you crying about?" He simply got the reply of, "Someone finally understands my art, before rubbing his nose. This response, however, quickly led to an argument between the two of them about what true art was. Back at the Chunin exams, the people in the stands were stunned. After all, many of them had expected a one-sided beatdown, but instead were getting an even match. Though some people were happy at Naruto's performance, namely his friends. Shikamaru thought to himself, "Troublesome, of course Naruto would improve the most out of us, but what is he planning?" Wondering how Naruto planned to defeat Neji. Hinata, while happy that the worst didn't happen to her crush, was worried for both Naruto and Neji. "Please don't hurt each other too badly, Neji ni, Naruto-kun," Hinata thought to herself. Sakura was thinking, "Naruto, were you always this strong?" Her desire to not be the weak link to her team increasing. Sasuke, while a little annoyed that the Dobi was seemingly making more progress than him, was also smirking about a potential sparring partner that might be able to give him a challenge. Kakashi for his part thought, "Sensei, if only you could see him now," he thought with one of his trademark eye smiles. Neji for his part was getting angrier and angrier by the second. In his mind, it wasn't supposed to go down like this. He was supposed to show this loser what happens when you try to defy your fate. Naruto on his end decided to go on the offensive once again and brought forth 6 more shadow clones, which 4 of them decided to attack Neji head-on and the other 2 said simultaneously Earth style. Earth flow spears, and just like that 2 more spikes of earth launched at Neji. In his desperation used his clan's ultimate defense as he started spinning, and with a shout of rotation the 4 clones that had attacked Neji head-on were dispelled and the 2 earth spears casted by the other 2 clones to attack with Neji were blunted and destroyed. All the Hyuga members in the audience were shocked to say the least, as here was a technique reserved for the main family being used by a branch family member. To many of them the idea was simply unthinkable. Neji's uncle Hiyashi for his part was shocked and a little happy, thinking of his late twin, Hizashi. "If you could see what a prodigy your son is." Neji was smirking, thinking he had finally pulled one over on Naruto, as he looked expecting to see a look of horror or even desperation, but what did he see? It was that damned smile. The idiot is still grinning in this situation. He asked him, "What are you going to be able to do against the ultimate defense of the Hyuga?" Naruto simply replied whimsically, "I guess I'll just wait it out." Still smiling, he created 6 shadow clones and 2 earth clones and had them surround Neji, preparing kunai with explosive tags attached to them. "Wait, is that really the best you can do?" Neji roared in anger. Naruto cheekily replied, "Well, you did say it was the ultimate defense of the Hyuga. And there's also the fact that while yes, I can't brute force my way through this, even I know that much. But that also doesn't mean you can keep this up forever. After all, even I can tell that even with all the training you Hyuga do, performing that technique must be pretty taxing on the body as well as your chakra reserves, and you know as well as I do that the moment you let up even a little, me and my clones will throw these kunai attached with explosive tags at you, defeating you anyway." Brandishing said kunai to let that point sink in, Naruto then said something in a serious tone for the first time this match. "So what will it be, Neji? Will you surrender now, or will you keep this up and I win this anyway?" Neji for his part was at first in denial, thinking, There's no way this idiot managed to corner me. But the more Neji thought about it, the more he realized Naruto was right. He could stop the rotation and try and take down the real Naruto, but with the spikes still on the field there was no way he'd reach him in time, and there was always the risk that he would end up attacking the wrong Naruto and be defeated by him and the other clones. Slowly Neji began to realize it was over and said to Genma, "Proctor, I forfeit." And then dropped his rotation and fell to one knee exhausted. "Shouza, Naruto," Genma declared. The crowd sat there stunned for what felt like hours before finally letting out a thunderous applause, as while yes, Naruto's earlier thought that a lot of people were going to lose money was correct. They had seen a splendid fight and many felt that they had gotten their money's worth to witness it. Many of the exam proctors began agreeing that Naruto was Chunin material with his level-headedness and ability to play to his opponent's weaknesses and his own strengths. Neji for his part was starting to lose his belief in things like fate. After all, someone who should have never been able to beat him had been able to accomplish just that. While he was thinking about this, he saw Naruto approaching him. "Come to rub it in my face," Neji said in an annoyed tone. "No." Naruto said, a little upset that anyone would ever believe that he would do something like that, before saying, "I just wanted to tell you that it was a good fight." As he moved his hand out to help Neji up, which Neji reached out, and as Naruto helped him up, he said, "Besides, I think I still owe you an explanation for that earlier question of yours." As they walked out of the arena to a cheering audience. "Naruto, you have grown so much. I know for a fact that your parents would be proud of you right now," thought the third Hokage Hiruzen with a fond smile. "They both performed admirably," he said to the case cage, as the man simply said with a smirk, "Yes, they did." As the case cage resisted the urge to lick his lips while thinking, "What else are you capable of, Naruto-kun?" and began thinking of ways to try and bring Naruto over to his side, as because of the Kyuubi he wouldn't be able to mark him with the cursed seal. "Hisashi, I believe that it is long overdue that your son learned the truth about what happened that terrible night," Neji's uncle Hiyashi thought, and got up from his seat intent on seeing that through. After this, the rest of the matches were delayed by a few minutes in order to repair the damage to the arena. As this happened, Naruto was talking to his teammate, Sasuke. "Any idea how are you gonna get past that Gaara guy's sand shield?" he questioned. Sasuke simply replied with a smirk, "Why, you afraid that I might beat him and defeat you easily, Dobi?" Naruto gained a small tick mark at that remark, saying, "No, it's just that guy is extremely dangerous, just be careful, Teme." Naruto sighing at his teammate's arrogance as Sasuke responded, "Don't need to tell me twice." Their conversation was cut short when the proctor called both Gaara and Sasuke into the arena. Naruto then patted Sasuke on the shoulder before saying, "Good luck," while mentally adding the unspoken part of, "You're gonna need it." Sasuke replied, albeit reluctantly, "Thanks," before heading into the arena. As Sasuke and Gaara entered the arena, the crowd was getting ready for another good fight. As Genma said, "Are both contestants ready to begin?" Both Sasuke and Gaara simply nodded, which was all Genma needed before shouting, "Hajime," and jumping towards the edge of the arena. Gaara said simply to Sasuke, "Mother shall enjoy feasting on your blood." As he sent his sand straight towards his opponent, Sasuke for his part was struggling to dodge Gaara's relentless assault, as he thought to himself, "I got to end this quickly, but there's no way I can get in close with all this sand coming at me. I need a distraction." He then put his hands into the tiger hand seal and said, "Fire style Fireball Jutsu," as he created a fireball that raced towards Gaara, temporarily forcing him to recall his sand in order to defend himself. As the fireball clashed against Gaara's sand, Sasuke raced through hand seals as he prepared his ace up his sleeve. When Gaara finally let down his sand after the fireball, only to see Sasuke with lightning in his hand, Sharingan activated, charging at him. Many of the Jonin in the stands were stunned at the jutsu, as they all knew full well what that technique was. "You didn't," was all Guy could muster to say, as Kakashi simply replied to him, "I did." As Sasuke charged with the lightning in his hand, he let out a shout of Chidori and thrusted his hand at Gaara. His hand pierced through the sand shield and managed to strike Gaara, though now his arm was stuck in Gaara's sand. Speaking of which, Gaara was now panicking at the sight of his own blood and was starting to lose it before he leveled an angry glare at Sasuke and angrily shouting at him, "How dare you spill my blood?" Before using his sand to slam Sasuke into the arena wall, knocking him out. As he prepared to finish him off, Genma shouted, hoping to end this before a potential death of one of the combatants, "Shouza Gaara." This didn't satisfy Gaara, however, as he prepared to use his sand to slam into the arena wall one more time and kill Sasuke. Meanwhile, in the stands, the audience looked on in horror as most of the Jonin were preparing to get involved if the need arose. Naruto, taking advantage of the attention being fixated on Gaara and Sasuke, discreetly threw a Hiraishin kunai behind the seats in the stands. The team from the Suna was looking on in horror and panic. If Gaara got himself killed because he couldn't resist the Shukaku demanding a kill, then that would throw off the whole invasion plan. Gaara was getting ready to kill Sasuke and then said to him, "Mother will enjoy your blood," before slamming the sand into the arena walls faster than even Genma could react from his position. Naruto, once again taking advantage of the crowd's fixation of what was going on in the arena, used the Hiraishin by using the formula he put on Sasuke when he patted his back earlier and managed to get to Sasuke just before the sand hit them both, then used the Hiraishin to get back to the kunai he had thrown earlier and discreetly put it away as he had Sasuke over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The crowd looked on in shock and horror as they expected to see Sasuke's mangled corpse once the dust cleared. Sakura and Hinata were looking on in tears at the sheer display of brutality they had just witnessed. Kakashi was on the verge of a panic attack, thinking, "Obito, please, forgive me." Orochimaru was thinking in barely concealed fury, "That brat ruined my plans for getting the Sharingan, now I'll make sure he conveniently disappears during the invasion." Gaara was laughing in a crazed manner, shouting that he had finally satisfied Mother. Everyone else's thoughts were going along similar lines until the dust cleared, and to almost everybody's shock, there wasn't a mangled body, there was nothing. Everyone was looking around and wondering what had happened until some of them heard Naruto's panting along with him, saying, "I thought I told you to be careful, Teme," he said, breathing heavily. They turned around to see Naruto panting with an unconscious but very much alive Sasuke over his shoulder. "I've never performed a body flicker so quickly," Naruto said, panting. Everyone just looked at him dumbstruck as Naruto started to feel a little self-conscious about it before Kakashi told Naruto, "Good job," looking at him with an eye smile before taking Sasuke to the infirmary while happy that one of his students hadn't died. Mentally, Kakashi was thinking, no body flicker should be able to move that fast, especially not from a genin who clearly just learned the technique, but the only other jutsu with the capability to allow someone to move that fast was Sensei's Hiraishin, but there's no way Naruto should be able to do that. After all, it took Minato Sensei at least 6 months to learn the technique and 6 more months to master it. Unbeknownst to Kakashi, the proctor Genma, who had a much more close-up view, was in a similar line of thinking. "I could have sworn I saw a yellow flash just a moment before that Sasuke kid was about to be killed, but there's no way that could have happened, as the only person I know who could perform the technique on their own was Lord Fourth, and he's long gone now." Gaara was furious that there was no blood or that his opponent's crushed body wasn't there and tried to look for Sasuke but let it go for the time being. That could have ended badly. The Cage said simply. "Yeah, it could have." Hiruzen replied in kind before thinking, "Who do you think you're fooling, Orochimaru?" The next 2 matches ended relatively quickly as Kankuro forfeited to Shino in order to keep his techniques a secret, and Shikamaru surrendered to Temari after having exhausted his chakra reserves, leaving an angry and utterly humiliated Temari in his wake. After these matches there was a 15-minute break. During that time Neji finally was able to get out of the infirmary and was having a chat with Naruto, being much more amicable to his teammates' surprise. "So Naruto, how did you use that technique without setting off the explosive tag?" Naruto said, "Still wondering about that, huh? Well, simply put, I channeled the chakra I need to perform the technique through my feet instead of hands." Naruto decided to elaborate further. "The Earth-style Caltrop spike field technique can be performed by channeling the necessary chakra through one's feet as well as one's hands. I simply used the jutsu as a way to place the explosive tag on the ground without making you suspicious. Plus it served a double purpose of limiting your movement," Naruto explained, after which Neji asked, "So how do you plan to beat Gaara?" Naruto replied cryptically, "Let's just say that I haven't shown everything I'm capable of yet." Neji was about to ask what he meant by that, only for the proctor to cut their conversation short as both Naruto and Gaara were called to the arena. "Kakashi-sensei, is Naruto going to be alright?" Sakura asked, worried for her teammate, but before her silver-haired sensei could respond he was cut off by a white-haired stranger approaching. "Don't count the brat out just yet, girlie. The stranger said as Sakura was wondering who this man was, though Kakashi recognized the man immediately before saying, "Jiraiya-sama," getting a reply of, "Yeah, good to see you too, Kakashi." Sakura, while she didn't recognize the man, she definitely recognized his name and couldn't help but exclaim, "Wait, as in Jeriah of the Sannin, that Jeriah." Jeriah for his part only chuckled at that before saying, "Yeah, that's me. You're more respectful than the brat at least." Sakura for her part could only wonder what the man was doing here, as the other shinobi nearby looked on in awe. After all, it wasn't every day you saw a shinobi of Jiraiya's caliber come to the Chunin exams. Tenten knew this and couldn't help but ask, not to sound rude, "Jiraiya-sama, but what are you doing here?" Jeriah replied with a smile, "Why wouldn't a teacher not come to see their student participate in these exams?" Just then the match started before any more questions could be asked. "Hajime!" Genma shouted and jumped towards the edge of the arena. Naruto immediately decided to test something and quickly threw a lighting chakra-coated kunai at Gaara. Gaara's sand instinctively rose up to protect him, only for the kunai to pierce right through, make a small cut on Gaara's sand armor and pierce its way out the other end. Naruto smiled to himself and then thought, so that proves that theory, his sand is powered by earth chakra, so I just gotta attack him from afar with lightning chakra. Thinking he had found a way to defeat Gaara, he decided to go for that method first. Powering up another lightning-coated kunai. Gaara for his part was stunned, as he had not only been struck once but twice today, before he smiled insanely at Naruto and said, "Mother will enjoy your blood." After which his sand raced towards Naruto, intent on crushing him with it. Naruto was then forced to go on the defensive in order to avoid the sand. "This guy's relentless," Naruto thought to himself, and he then threw some more lightning-powered kunai at Gaara in the hope of gaining some room, but Gaara, unlike last time, simply dodged the kunai, and that was when Naruto realized, "Shit, I need to get in close, but if I do then his sand will only crush me. Come on, think Naruto, there's gotta be a way out of this." He was broken from this train of thought when the sand grazed his leg. "There might not be a choice, I might have to use Hiraishin, otherwise I'm done for, and unlike the way I was with Neji, there's no way this guy's gonna let me live." Naruto looked up to the stand, still dodging and avoiding the stand, to see Jiraiya, who simply nodded. That was all the confirmation Naruto needed, as he took one tri-pronged kunai and stabbed it into the arena wall, while taking the other kunai and throwing it coated in lightning chakra towards Gaara, who simply dodged it. Meanwhile, in the stands, the rookies didn't know what Naruto was planning. Kiba even said aloud, "What's the dobi doing?" upon seeing Naruto stab his kunai into the arena wall with his ninkin Akamaru barking in agreement. Kakashi and many other of the more veteran Jonin could only stare in shock upon seeing the familiar kunai, and Kakashi asked Jiraiya, "Is that?" Jiraiya confirmed quietly, "It is." Neji said aloud to himself afterwards, "What is he planning?" with many of the rookies wondering the same, as they would get their answer shortly. In the arena, as the kunai that Gaara had dodged passed his head, he tried once again to crush Naruto with his sand, only for his opponent disappeared in a flash and reappear right behind Gaara. Clutching the kunai he had thrown, Naruto delivered a vicious kick to Gaara's head, followed up quickly by a backhand to Gaara's abdomen. As the sand rushed back to protect Gaara, he disappeared as quickly as he appeared, returning back to the kunai he had stabbed into the arena wall earlier. Naruto, breathing heavily, then said to Gaara, "I'm not done yet." The spectators looked on in either shock, amazement, or curiosity, or a mixture of all three. Many of the rookies looked on mainly in amazement and curiosity. After all, if Naruto could do this the whole time, why didn't he use this jutsu against Neji in their earlier fight? This was a sentiment by many of the younger generation. Kiba couldn't help himself when he said, "That looks badass as hell. Why the hell didn't he do that before, in his fight against Neji?" with Akamaru barking in agreement. Neji couldn't keep the shock off of his face as he said quietly, he was holding back this entire time, as he now saw that Naruto could have ended their match much quicker had he used that technique. Tenten couldn't shake off the feeling that those tri-pronged kunai and the technique Naruto was using looked familiar, like she had heard about them but couldn't remember why they looked familiar. "Where have I seen those before?" she thought to herself. The older generation, especially those from Kakashi and Gai's generation, were looking on in shock. After all, the only other person to have ever used those kunai and that technique in recent memory was the late Fourth Hokage, and they were fully aware of what that technique was capable of in the right hands. Seeing the look on her sensei's face, Sakura asked Kakashi, "Sensei, are you alright? You look like you've seen a ghost?" Kakashi could only reply in his stupor, "Maybe I have." Lee then asked Guy, "What is that technique, Guy-sensei, and why do all the older shinobi look like they are seeing some sort of ghost?" Guy replied in an uncharacteristically calm way to his student, Lee. "That technique is known as the Hiraishin, and it is the signature technique of the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze." Guy then trailed off. "That's why those kunai looked familiar." Tenten all but shouted, and upon seeing her fellow rookies' looks of confusion, the fourth Hokage didn't use standard kunai for his Hiraishin. He had some custom-made for the use of his jutsu. Though she also wondered aloud, that does beg the question of how he learned to do this technique. Jeriah then said before any of the rookies could jump to conclusions, "That would be because I gave him the notes on how the jutsu worked, he figured out the rest himself." Kiba then asked, "Then why didn't he use it in his fight against Neji then?" This time it was Kakashi who answered, "Because revealing that he could use the jutsu would have put a target on his back. Am I right, Jiraiya-sama?" Jiraiya grimly nodded, "Yes, it would have." Hinata then asked shyly, "How would have that have put a target on Naruto-kun's back?" She stammered out, after which Jiraiya said with the same level of severity as before, "Because of Iwa." He said simply, "But what does Iwa have to do with any of this?" Kiba asked impatiently. This time it was Shikamaru who said something, "Because Iwa's forces suffered heavily at the hands of the fourth Hokage and would probably do everything in their power to make sure that in case of war that there isn't someone who could potentially do the same level of damage to their forces. Troublesome. Leave it to Naruto to somehow strike fear into people he hasn't even met." After he was finished, all eyes turned to the match in the arena. Naruto decided that if he had any chance to win this, he would have to end the match quickly, so he prepared 3 more Hiraishin kunai and threw them towards different ends of the arena walls. Gaara for his part looked both angry and insanely happy. In Gaara's mind, this sort of fight was what made getting blood for Mother worth it. He sent his sand out once again in an attempt to kill Naruto. As the sand was just about to reach him, Naruto disappeared with a yellow flash and kicked Gaara in the stomach before twisting mid-air and smashing Gaara over the head with the blunt side of his kunai, then disappearing again before Gaara's sand could grab him. As Naruto reappeared at a different kunai, he saw that Gaara's sand armor was beginning to crack. Naruto then realized, thinking to himself, "That's how I can beat this guy. I just need to strike fast and hard before the sand can grab me." The team from Suna was sweating bullets at this point. After all, if this kid beat Gaara, then the invasion plan wasn't going to work. "Shit, I know you like to play with your victims, Gaara, but please for once end this quickly." The Jonin of the Suna team, Baki, thought to himself. "Gaara, you should already have been able to beat this guy already." The 2 Sand siblings thought simultaneously. Jiraiya, watching them from afar, decided to discreetly create a shadow clone to knock them out when the invasion started. As everyone was paying attention to the match below, the match had devolved into a sort of cat-and-mouse game, with Naruto using his lightning-coated kunai in order for them to pierce Gaara's sand shield, and then Hiraishin inside when the sand was pierced, unleash a flurry of attacks, then Hiraishin away again before Gaara's sand could grab him. As Naruto was about to make another go at it when Gaara shouted, "Enough!" as he said that the sand seemed to merge partially with Gaara, creating some sort of raccoon-human hybrid. At that moment Naruto thought to himself, "I thought there was something eerily familiar about him, now I see why." The partially transformed Gaara roared, "Mother will have your blood." Naruto now knew he would not only need to win for the victory over Gaara, he would also have to win for his own survival. In the stands a lot of people were starting to freak out as whispered murmurs of, "What is that thing?" and of, "Is that kid some sort of monster?" were heard from the younger generation among the crowd, while the older generation were much more fearful, for they had already felt such chakra 13 years ago and were not eager to face such terror again. As all this was happening, the Jonin were trying to get a hold of the situation and try and calm the audience down before things got out of hand. Sasuke, who had managed to somewhat recover from his earlier fight with Gaara and managed to make his way back to the stands, could only look on in shock at what was happening to Gaara, saying, "What the hell?" Just as it looked like the Jonin were about to have a potential riot on their hands, white feathers fell seemingly out of nowhere from the sky. All of the Chunin level and up shinobi, along with some of the higher level genin in the stadium, realized it was a genjutsu and managed to dispel it, but some of the lower level genin and all of the civilians weren't so lucky. Kiba, Lee, and Shikamaru were among those caught in the genjutsu. The shadow clone Jeriah had created and hid earlier moved quickly to knock out the sand team. The clone managed to knock out Kankuro by hitting him in the back of the head with the blunt end of a kunai. But before it could knock out Temari and move to attack Baki. Baki stabbed the clone in the head with a kunai of his own, dispelling it. He then said to Temari, "You know your orders, get Gaara to an area where he can fully unleash the Ichibi." Temari quickly questioned, "But what about Kankuro?" Worried for her other brother's safety, Baku's only reply was to simply create a shadow clone and order it to go along with Temari and take Kankuro as well to make sure that the Ichibi was released before said clone went to do exactly that. It was then that all hell broke loose as several Oto and Suna ninja came out of the forest surrounding the village to assault the gates of Konoha's walls. The Konoha Jonin in the stands were now under attack from several enemies at once. Orochimaru was about to reveal himself when he was forced to jump out of the way from his old sensei attempting to slash him with a kunai. "Why are you attacking me, Lord Hokage?" Hoping to keep up his charade a little longer but knew the jig was up when Hiruzen said to him, "Drop the act, my wayward student, I already know the real Cage is dead." As he signaled some of his best Anbu to come out of hiding. Upon seeing this, Orochimaru started laughing, which to say the least unnerved Hiruzen and his Anbu companions. Orochimaru finally managed to get his laughter under control as he signaled his Sound 4 to come out of hiding. He said between chuckles, "Numbers won't help you with I've got plans, sensei." Hiruzen didn't need to wait long to learn what he meant by that as Orochimaru performed a jutsu that made his blood run cold. Edo Tensei. And with that, Orochimaru slammed his palm onto the ground and 3 coffins immediately rose from the ground with the numbers 1, 2, and 4 respectively. Upon seeing the coffins rising from the ground, Hiruzen raced through hand seals before saying fire style. Burning ash as he said that. What looked like black powder spewed out of his mouth when the coffins looked like they were about to open. He clicked his teeth and a massive explosion destroyed the coffins with the numbers 2 and 4 on them, but it seemed that the coffin with the number 1 on it however was still in one piece. Orochimaru cackled. "Well, I was hoping to bring the rest out in this reunion, but this should be enough to deal with you," he said menacingly as the coffin opened. The Hokage and his Anbu looked on in shock, for before them was none other than Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage. "Sarutobi, is that you?" Hashirama asked. Hiruzen shouted angrily at Orochimaru. "You dared to defile their graves," before managing to rein in his anger. He then answered his former teacher's question saying sadly, "Yes, sensei, it is me." Orochimaru chuckled cruelly. "While it is a shame to stop such a heartwarming reunion, I got a village to destroy." As he said that, he inserted a kunai with a command tag into the back of the head of the resurrected first Hokage. After he did that, his body went stiff as if it was not his to control anymore and his eyes became lifeless like that of a puppet. With this happening, the Sound 4 immediately engaged the third Hokage's Anbu, hoping to end them quickly and put up a barrier so their master could engage the third Hokage alone. Unfortunately for the Sound 4, these Anbu didn't earn their ranks for nothing, and while individually they wouldn't stand much of a chance, the opposing Anbu still had a numbers advantage of 3-1. "Sensei." Hiruzen heard a familiar voice behind him, and in the corner of his eye he saw Jeriah appear as he finally snapped out of his stupor. He decided finally that enough was enough. He channeled his chakra and bit his finger before saying summoning jutsu and summoned Enma, who upon being summoned immediately remarked to his old friend, "We should have killed him when we had the chance, Hiruzen." Hiruzen simply replied, "Yes, we should have, and that is a mistake that I'm going to fix right now," before having Enma change into his adamantine staff form. As this was happening, Gaara had blown a hole in the arena wall, being led away by Temari and the Baki clone. Naruto realized what they might be up to and immediately pursued them. Kakashi and Guy were fighting off both Suna and Oto ninja when they finally killed the last of the ones that had attacked them. Kakashi said to Sakura, "Sakura, quickly dispel the genjutsu over Kiba and Shikamaru, as I have a mission for you three, Sasuke, and Shino." He ordered, to which Sakura complied by first dispelling the genjutsu over Kiba and Akamaru. But when she went to dispel the genjutsu on Shikamaru, she started to get angry, stating, "Shikamaru, you," after which she kicked him the shin hard as Shikamaru yelped in pain as he went to glare at Sakura. However, he saw a very angry woman staring him down with a look that he knew all too well not to trifle with. "Troublesome," he muttered under his breath before asking Kakashi, "What are our orders?" he asked lazily. Kakashi gave them their orders. You five are to pursue Gaara and assist Naruto, who is already chasing him down, and assist in neutralizing him. He then continued upon, your secondary objective is to track down and capture the Sand siblings Kankuro, Gaara, and Temari. Capture them if you can, kill them if you must. Kakashi said with authority. Understood, he then asked, yes sir. They said in unison as they went after Naruto and Gaara. After they went, Guy said to his students, I want you two to take Lee and Hinata to the medics as neither are in any condition to be fighting, after which I want you two to assist in the evacuation of civilians. His two students nodded before saying, Hi sensei. And off they went to fulfill their missions. As Naruto was trying to catch up to Gaara as fast as he could, thinking to himself what Gaara was trying to do, and then he realized as his blood ran cold. Shit, they must be trying to release the Ichibi. After realizing what was going to happen, he checked what supplies of he had left on the move, and he had 24 regular kunai, which in a pinch he could put a Hiraishin tag on and use them as such. 6 purpose-made Hiraishin kunai left. 32 shuriken. 4 low-grade chakra suppression tags. 10 low-grade explosion tags. 5 medium-grade restriction tags. 10 blank tags and some sealing ink. And finally 8 spare Hiraishin tags. So I've got those supplies and about 35% of my chakra. Naruto thought to himself as he tried to come up with a plan to defeat Gaara, but he also realized, if I come across any more enemies I run the risk of not having enough chakra for when I take him on. This time surprisingly he heard the Kyuubi say, if you are gonna take on my idiotic little brother then take my chakra. Naruto said mentally, I didn't realize you cared whether I live or die Kyuubi. Kyuubi snorted back, I just would rather not have Shukaku bragging about how he was to kill my container for the rest of eternity. That, and I would rather not be forced to reform over the course of 3 years. Kyuubi said, remembering how painful the process was, but upon hearing the Ichibi's name Naruto inquired, so Shukaku is the Ichibi's name, huh? Then what is your name then, Kyuubi? The moment those words left his mouth, however, the Kyuubi snarled at him, grinding out, don't mistake this as me making friends with you, fleshbag. I'm just looking out for myself. Naruto only smiled before mentally stating, one day I'll learn your name, Kyuubi. The Kyuubi only snorted derisively, that'll be the day. As Naruto and his tenant finished their little conversation, he noticed reinforcements approaching, though whether they were enemy or friendly he could not tell. As he turned around to see who they were, he sighed with relief upon noticing Konoha headbands and seeing his fellow rookies' faces, but asked with a frown, what are you guys doing here? Sasuke smirked and replied, someone's got to make sure you don't get yourself killed, Dobi. Before anything else could be said between the rookies, a shout of wind style windcutter was heard, quickly followed by some blades of wind shooting out of a nearby tree line towards their group as they all dodged and dived towards the ground. The group stopped to see who had fired off the wind blades, only to see Temari with her Warfin fully unfolded along with the Baki, the Tsunade team's Jonin sensei, carrying her unconscious brother. As she prepared to fire off another windcutter, the group scattered once again. Thinking to himself, Shikamaru thought to himself, the only way I see a way to defeat or even just stall them is if we break up our group and have one group go after Gaara and another group stay here to delay or possibly even defeat them, but that leaves the problem of who should stay and who should go. He quickly thought about the chances of success for each outcome and decided to tell the group, I think we should split up. The group understood and nodded at the first part, but they were shocked at what the groups were going to be. Me, Sasuke, and Shino will stay behind and fight these guys, the rest of us should move on ahead. The group was flabbergasted as they dodged another windcutter. Naruto was about to object that would deprive most of the second group of heavy hitters before Shino interrupted. That would be a logical plan of action, Shikamaru. He said in a monotone voice. However, Sakura objected loudly. In what way is that logical? We need to stop that Gaara guy from doing whatever he has planned, but if we do this we will be deprived of much of the firepower needed to do so. Shikamaru replied seriously. That's because it's not going to be your job to defeat Gaara at the moment. It is simply to delay him, because we can't fight a Jonin alongside Gaara and hope to win. We will have to take them out separately. The second group nodded before taking off after Gaara as Temari was about to fire off another jutsu at them. Using her fan to fire off another jutsu, she was quickly forced to dodge a fireball heading her way. She looked around to see who had done it, but then she and Baki heard a loud buzzing sound and saw a literal ball of insects headed their way, which she quickly used her fan to disperse. After that her body went stiff as she saw a shadow connecting to her own. That was all she could see before Sasuke struck her with the blunt end of his kunai and her world went dark. Now that just leaves the Jonin. Shikamaru stated as his group proceeded to attack the Baki clone. Naruto and his group were pursuing Gaara, and before long Kiba said, "He's in the clearing just up ahead." Just before they reached the clearing, Naruto took out two Hiraishin tags and said to his companions, "Stick these to your clothes, that way if you're in a pinch, I can get you out of it." Said companions looked questioningly at him. Before Sakura asked, "Couldn't you do what you did with Sasuke?" Naruto deadpanned, "Well, if you would like me to appear at any time without warning wherever those clothes happen to be, feel free. Those marks don't go away, unlike these tags which I can remove." Naruto explained. Needless to say, Kiba and Sakura quickly took the tags and stuck them to their clothes. Naruto, Sakura and Kiba finally reached the clearing to see Gaara screaming, "Mother will have your blood, Uzumaki," as he charged them. "Scatter!" Naruto shouted quickly and created 10 shadow clones which began charging up for the earth style. Earth flow spears. As soon as the clones were done, they unleashed a bunch of spears made from earth towards the partially transformed Gaara, who used his sand to protect him, from which blocked 7 out of the 10 attacks and got launched as a result. "Now Kiba!" Naruto shouted as a shout of fang over fang as both Kiba and Akamaru caught Gaara in a pincer attack and then launched him back further. Naruto then shouted, "Sakura now!" As Sakura threw a 2 kunai with explosive tags behind Gaara as he was being launched, then they exploded, sending him in the opposite direction and destroying his sand armor in the process. Naruto then used Hiraishin, was in front of Gaara in an instant. "At this range," he said, running through hand seals before continuing, "there's no way I can miss." Earth style. Earth flow spears, slamming his hands onto the ground as the spears made of earth. One spear heading towards Gaara's left leg, the other his right shoulder, rocketed towards Gaara, though unfortunately for Naruto the sand that protected Gaara was able to block the spear headed towards his leg, though not the one to his shoulder. "Did we get him?" Kiba asked, getting hopeful only for said hope to be crushed when Naruto said grimly, "We hurt him, but he isn't going to be defeated so easily." As they both saw a battered but very much still undefeated Gaara. Gaara, after getting up from the onslaught and upon seeing his own blood for the second time that day, shouted at Naruto, "You will pay for shedding my blood." Glaring at him before putting his hands into a hand seal. Naruto, realizing what Gaara was doing, shouted once again, "Scatter!" as the three of them ran as fast and as far as they could from Gaara before he said feigned sleep technique as the Ichibi was fully unleashed with a shout of, "I'm free." Before looking around to see where the group that had fought his container had headed off to so he could finish them. He shouted out, "Come out now, little meat sacks, and I'll give you the privilege of a quick death." Before he fired off a powerful blast of sand and wind in a random direction in an attempt to bait them out as the Naruto's group hid away, Kiba quietly asked Naruto, "What do we do now?" Naruto replied, "Right now we have to stall him until the others arrive." Sakura asked worriedly, "Is there no way we can defeat him right now, or shouldn't we retreat if we can't defeat him?" Naruto shook his head saying, "Right now we can't do much other than keep him distracted, because if he decides to head towards the center of the village there is no telling how much death and destruction he could cause, and that's not even considering the potential hole he could punch in our defenses." As the true implications of what devastation Gaara and the Ichibi could cause if they left them alone to their own devices began to dawn on his group. "So what's the plan?" Kiba asked, to which Naruto created 2 shadow clones and gave them the instructions to mark as many trees as they could near the Ichibi in order to give him avenues of attack and retreat. He then told his 2 companions his plan. "Our job is to keep the Ichibi contained. To do that we are going to attack with our fastest but least chakra intensive attacks so that we can lure him into staying in this area. Right now I don't have much chakra left, so I'll be helping you guys retreat if you guys are in a bind." After hearing him say that last bit, Kiba tossed Naruto a soldier pill, telling him, "I don't want to die because you had too little chakra," he stated bluntly before heading off to do his part in the plan. Naruto quickly ate the pill and felt his chakra reserves replenished to a quarter of his normal levels as he and his group heard the Ichibi fire off another blast of sand and wind in another attempt to flush them out, and prepared to execute the plan. Back with Hiruzen, Jeriah, and what was left of his Anbu companions, as 4 of them were dead and 2 too badly injured to fight anymore, though they had managed to kill the one with 2 heads as well as the big one with orange hair. As Hiruzen insisted on taking on Orochimaru, this left Jeriah with the unenviable task of taking on a resurrected Hokage and attempting to seal him away, as the remaining Anbu were tasked with taking on what was left of the Sound Four. The one with multiple arms said to the remaining Anbu, "Give it up. While you may have been able to kill Jirobo and Sakin, we are much stronger." In an attempt to intimidate them, which they didn't react to, he sighed and said, "Not much of a talking group, are we? Don't worry, you'll be screaming shortly enough." His voice gaining a malicious tone towards the end, after which both sides clashed again. Shikamaru and his group were struggling in their fight against the Baki clone, as he seemed to dodge one attack after the other with seemingly no effort. He then saw Shino attempt to rush him from behind. "Bad idea," he said before he sliced him in 2 with a blade of wind. He smirked at first, but the smirk dropped upon seeing Shino turn into a bunch of Kakaichu which latched onto him, removed his remaining chakra, dispelling him. With the task done, Shikamaru's group tied up the unconscious Kankuro and Temari before heading off in order to reunite with Naruto's group. As the real Baki got back the memories of the dispelled clone, he thought to himself, "Damn it." As he dodged another sword strike from a purple-haired Anbu who seemed really intent on killing him for some reason. "Just my luck," he thought to himself. Overall, the invasion of Konoha wasn't going as badly for Konoha as some people had feared it would, as while 15% of Konoha shinobi were dead or wounded, the toll on the combined Otosuna invasion force was even worse, as about 50 to 60% of their invasion force were now either dead, wounded, or captured. It was in this chaotic atmosphere that Konoha's Jonin commander Shikaku Nara began preparing a counterattack in order to drive this enemy out his home village. Shikamaru, Shino, and Sasuke were all heading towards Naruto's group as fast as they could before Shino said, "They should be just up ahead." As they came across a clearing with the Ichibi rampaging, before they could enter it, someone appeared right in front of them. Recognizing him, "Naruto?" Sasuke asked, to which the Naruto said, "No, I'm just a clone. Boss told me to give these to you guys." As he pulled out 2 Hiraishin tags, giving one to Shikamaru and Shino, though Sasuke couldn't help but ask upon seeing only 2 tags, "Wait, don't I need one?" The Naruto clone shook his head. "Unless you put on some new clothes, then no. Because boss put a Hiraishin tag on you already, though you might want to burn those clothes after this is done, because with the way boss put it on you, that mark won't go away on its own, unlike the tags which can be peeled off." Continuing, the clone said to Shikamaru, "Right now boss, Sakura, and Kiba are doing the best they can to hold off the Ichibi right now. We need a plan to delay the Ichibi as long as possible until someone can seal it away again, or if possible find a way to defeat it." Shikamaru thought to himself for a second before asking the clone, "How did Gaara release the Ichibi to begin with?" The clone answered, "Gaara used something called the feigned sleep technique." Shikamaru realized then and there what their next priority should be, saying to them, "We need to wake up Gaara if we want to defeat the Ichibi." Shino agreed, saying, "It is a logical plan because it seems Gaara is using sleep to let the Ichibi take over." He said before the clone said, "Great, I'll tell the boss." Before he dispelled in a puff of smoke. The 3 remaining there decided to go find Naruto's group to speak to them in person so they could formulate a plan. Meanwhile, with the original Naruto got the memories of his dispelled clone and said to Kiba and Sakura, "Our backup just arrived. We need to wake up Gaara if we want to defeat the Ichibi." Kiba said simply, "Easier said than done." Wondering what he meant, Kiba pointed at the Ichibi, more specifically its head where an unconscious Gaara was. "We have to get up there?" Sakura exclaimed incredulously, though this alerted the Ichibi to where they were and they had to scatter once more to avoid another attack as it shouted, "Found you." Back in the clearing where an unconscious Temari and Kankuro were tied up, Kankuro slowly came to. As he did, he saw the Ichibi rampaging and thought to himself, "What happened?" Then he took notice that both he and Temari were tied up and said to himself, "Shit." Wondering for a second how he was gonna get out of this one, he then thought, "Did they take Karasu?" Upon realizing that he still had his puppet, he sighed in relief before thinking, "Now to get out of here." As he created a chakra thread in order to use one of the many blades that his puppet had, which he did with some difficulty as he was still a little light-headed, but manage it he did, as cut the rope tying him up with the blade. He then went over to free and wake up his sister. As the groups under Naruto and Shikamaru finally reunited, they began to pull together what information they had and what they could do against Gaara and the Ichibi. Naruto asked Shikamaru, "You got a plan?" Shikamaru simply nodded before saying to the group, "If we want to have any chance of defeating Gaara, we need to wake him up." Sasuke then interjected, "Wouldn't it be better if we just killed him?" To which surprisingly Kiba agreed, but Naruto quickly shot that idea down, saying, "Yeah, that would work for the whole of 3 years and possibly ruin any chance of reconciliation with Suna." Shino raised an eyebrow at this, saying to Naruto, "You seem knowledgeable on this subject, and what do you mean it would only work for 3 years?" Naruto said knowingly, "You can't kill a Biju. You can only seal it away, and if you kill the host, the Biju will die temporarily but will reform over the course of 3 years, usually in the place its previous host was killed." He took a breath before saying, "As for how I know this, let's just say I know from personal experience." He finished as he heard Kyuubi snort from that last bit. He then saw the look some of the group were giving him and started feeling uncomfortable. Naruto then asked Shikamaru, "What's the plan?" Hoping to change the subject upon hearing this, Shikamaru told the others the plan he had to defeat Gaara. Hiruzen was panting heavily, as was his opponent Orochimaru. He then saw his remaining Anbu cut down the last of the Sound Four, which admittedly there wasn't many of those Anbu left, as while half were still alive, only 2 were still in any condition to fight. He then looked to see Jeriah doing his best to try and seal away Hashirama, and that's when he made his choice, saying to Orochimaru, "It is time for both you and me to atone for our mistakes." As he raced through hand seals and dodging his former students' attacks, making everyone there wonder what jutsu was the third Hokage be attempting to perform. However, Jeriah, who had seen this jutsu performed before, could only watch on in horror at his sensei, as he was powerless to do anything about it due to the first Hokage's constant onslaught. Just then he barely dodged another one of his opponent's wood-style jutsu and reluctantly forced his gaze away from his sensei and back onto his undead foe. As Hiruzen finished the necessary hand seals, he clapped his hands together and said Reaper Death Seal, and with that the ghostly figure of the Shinigami appeared behind the third Hokage. Hiruzen wasted no time, as first he charged at his resurrected sensei, dodging his attacks and then grabbing onto and holding him with an iron grip as the Shinigami plunged its hand through him and into Hashirama, taking and sealing away their souls. Hiruzen felt like he was going to drop dead the moment once the Shinigami took his former teacher's soul, but he willed himself to keep going as he used as much strength as possible to reach Orochimaru. But by now his target realized what he was doing and attempted to strike him down in order to make a break for it. However, before he could do it, he suddenly found himself sinking downwards, as Jeriah said, Earth-style swamp of the underworld, making it so Orochimaru couldn't move out of the way in time from Hiruzen's charge. Orochimaru started to panic as Hiruzen gripped him with all his might before saying to his old student, "I've lived too long, my wayward student, and so have you, so I'll do what I should have done all those years ago." As Orochimaru attempted to stab his former teacher in the head with a kunai, which Hiruzen caught by intercepting his arm mid-swing, which only served to increase Orochimaru's desperation as he saw the form of the Shinigami getting closer and closer as he fought his hardest to escape the third Hokage's grasp, but between the swamp beneath his feet and his old teacher he just couldn't escape. The Shinigami by now was upon both of them and was in the process of shoving its hand right through Hiruzen as well as Orochimaru to take both of their souls. Orochimaru by now was doing everything in his power to escape, and in one last attempt to stop the inevitable he tried to punch Hiruzen in the face with his other arm, only for said punch to be caught by Enma, who had reverted back to his normal form. With that, the Shinigami finally finished extracting their souls as both the bodies of Hiruzen and Orochimaru fell to the ground, bodies stiff, and eyes lifeless, everyone around them looking on in shock. Jeriah said mournfully, tears threatening to spill out, "I'm sorry, sensei," cursing the fact how yet again he couldn't save someone he cared. Enma stared at his now dead friend for a few seconds before he went and closed the eyes of his deceased friend's body. Jeriah then asked Enma, "Before you go, can you please bring sensei's body to the rear for proper burial?" Enma nodded in agreement before bringing his old friend's body back for proper burial. Jeriah then said with authority to the 2 remaining Anbu that could still fight, "You 2 burn the snake's body. Make sure there is no DNA that can be used, and then seal up and bring your deceased comrades for burial at the rear." One of the Anbu, still staring angrily at Orochimaru's body, said, "With pleasure." As Jiraiya made some shadow clones to bring back the Anbu that were still alive but too wounded to fight, as his companions set about their grisly task setting the traitor's body alight and sealing the bodies of their comrades. Kankuro, after freeing himself and his sister, was trying to wake her up, shaking her lightly, saying softly, "Hey Tamari, you need to wake up." With his sister slowly waking up, he went to get his gear before he heard a shout of, "Gaara!" He quickly turned to see his sister panicking with wide eyes on instinct. He ran to her saying, "What's wrong?" All she could say in reply was, "Where's Gaara?" She got her answer not from Kankuro but a distant roar from the Ichibi, as they both realized that Gaara had done his part before Tamari realized something and told her brother, "We need to get to Gaara right now." While Kankuro cared for his brother, he couldn't help but ask, "Why?" Tamari answered, "There are some Konoha ninja fighting him right now." Kankuro's eyes widened upon that revelation before he nodded and quickly went to get his gear. As they both prepared to fight to defend their brother, in a planning room, Shikaku Nara was furiously running strategy after strategy, potential outcome after potential outcome in his head as he was preparing the final preparations for the counter-offensive that would drive these invaders from his home. What worried him right now most wasn't if they could drive out the enemy, there was no question about that. No, it was the projected casualty list and if his village would be able to fight off a potentially opportunistic Kumo in a future war that opportunism would create. As while yes, Iwe could right now be a potential thorn in Konoha's side, they were still recovering militarily from the losses they took in the last war and probably did not want to face off against them so soon. There was also the fact that while yes, the casualty figures right now for total shinobi were 17%, that number only accounted for the shinobi that were in the village at the time of the invasion, as 20% of Konoha's forces were out on missions when the invasion had occurred. His first order was to have all forces near the border with Kase no Kuni to prepare ambushes and intercept any Suna shinobi they could retreating across the border. However, the potentially long casualty list wasn't Shikaku's only concern, as he now looked at what forces were most of the casualties had been taken, as while casualties taken right now weren't particularly high, it was the fact that they were falling disproportionately on the Anbu and Chunin forces, as with each lost Anbu was a shinobi lost that was incredibly difficult to replace, and then with the Chunin losses, as they were the village's main combat strength as well as the village's primary labor source for missions. Just as Shikaku was about to make another deduction, a Chunin opened the door with news for him, saying, "The preparations are complete. The forces are awaiting your orders, Commander." Wasting no time, Shikaku nodded and said, "Good, tell them their orders are to drive the enemy out of the village, with the secondary objective of capturing as many enemy ninja alive as we can, with priority for capture given to Suna shinobi." The Chunin nodded and went to relay the commander's orders. After a hard fight in which both shinobi had suffered injuries, Baki was finally ready to finish off this pesky purple-haired Anbu and finally regroup with his students. He decided to ask the purple-haired Anbu one last thing. "Why were you so intent on killing me? Even if I attacked your home, that level of hatred is intense?" The Anbu, still clutching her bleeding shoulder, glared at him and said simply, "Because you killed Hayate." Realizing that this kunoichi must have been close to the man he killed a few nights earlier, he said softly as the Anbu closed her eyes waiting for the inevitable, "May you find peace in the next world with him." As he prepared another windblade, only for a shout of "dynamic entry" and a loud crash to be heard when the Anbu opened her eyes to see Baki unconscious inside a miniature crater in the wall, with Guy standing in front of her with Kakashi following up saying, "Neko, those injuries look bad. Guy, get her to the medical tents in the rear." Guy shouted enthusiastically, "Of course, my youthful friend," as he put Neko on his back before racing to get her to the medics. After they were gone, Kakashi decided to tie up Baki and bring him in for capture and later interrogation, because right now what the village needed was information about Orochimaru and his new village of Otogakure. Naruto and Kiba right now were doing everything in their power to make sure that the Ichibi's attention stayed on the two of them, as they were the fastest shinobi of their group, as they were constantly being attacked and dodging to the best of their ability while waiting for the others to finish preparing for the trap their teammates planned to set. They then saw a small fireball shoot up into the air before bursting midair. Naruto then said to Kiba, "That's the signal, hold on," as he grabbed onto Kiba and Akamaru and used the Hiraishin to teleport them behind the Ichibi as they started running towards the trap their group had set up. The Ichibi noticed this and began to run towards them, thinking they were trying to keep him away from the village's main body, unknowingly walking into a trap. As Shikamaru, Shino, and Sakura finished setting up the trap, he wondered to himself, is this going to hold the Ichibi long enough for our plan to work? As he looked at the trap the three of them had created, which included many low and some medium-grade restriction tags as well a metric fuckton of explosive tags of varying qualities, as he looked around he decided that there was no time to waste as he looked at Sasuke, who was keeping watch in case the Ichibi came their way before the trap was done with his Sharingan. Shikamaru shouted to him, "Trap's done, send the signal." Sasuke nodded before firing a weak fireball jutsu into the sky to signal Naruto and Kiba that the trap was ready. Shikamaru, while knowing that the trap was their best chance at success, had a bad feeling that there was still some factor that was unaccounted for, but was still hoping that he was wrong for once as everyone got into position to execute the plan. Naruto and Kiba were currently running for their lives as the Ichibi was gaining ground on them due to their increasing exhaustion. As they ran for what seemed like forever, they finally came across the area where the trap was, and as Kiba shouted, "Guys, now!" As Shukaku stepped into the trap the same time Naruto and Kiba left it. At that moment numerous explosive tags went off, as did the restriction seals Naruto had provided for the trap. The Ichibi roared in pain and fury as it attempted to crush some of the group with its hand, only to find movement a much harder task as the restriction tags began to work along with Shikamaru, saying to himself, "Shadow Possession Jutsu success." Restricting its movement even further as Sakura attempted to keep the Ichibi's attention divided by throwing shuriken at it. With this setup complete, Sasuke charged up the Ichibi's back with both a Chidori and Hiraishin kunai in his hand, trying to get to Gaara. As he charged up, however, the sand that made up the Ichibi's body rose up instinctively to protect its host as Sasuke was doing his best to outrun the sand. Just as he was about to reach Gaara, a sand wall appeared in front of him, forcing him to use the Chidori in order to punch through the wall. As the Hiraishin kunai he was clutching punched through as well, landing right beside Gaara's body. Naruto then knew that it was his turn, only to realize that he was out of chakra, thinking in a panic, "Shit." Just as he was about to try and call Kiba for another soldier pill, he heard a sigh of, "Pathetic human, while I would love to watch you squirm, I know that the accompanying headache from you whining won't be worth it in the eternal nightmare that is to come if Shukaku were to kill my host. Take some chakra and be gone." The Kyuubi said dismissively as a thin red cloak of chakra enveloped Naruto, filling his chakra reserves before dissipating as Naruto used the Hiraishin, and as he appeared in front of Gaara he reeled back his fist before shouting as loud as he could, "Wake up!" before punching Gaara in the head as hard as he could. Gaara, feeling the sudden blow to his head, began to wake up as the Ichibi shouted, enraged about going back into the seal, "Damn you, Kurama! Damn you and your Jinchuriki to the furthest depths of hell!" As he was finally sealed back away, as the group sighed in relief that it was now over, Naruto thought to himself, "What a noisy guy." The now named Kurama simply snorted before saying, "You don't know the half of it." Naruto then remembered what Shukaku had said before he pointed out slyly, "So Kurama, huh?" The Kyuubi enraged roared inside his head, shouting, "Do not dare call me by that name, you have not earned the right to do so." As Naruto now had a small headache from the sheer noise of the roar, as he mentally noted not to call the Kyuubi by that name until they were on better terms. Naruto then approached Gaara as the group shouted at him to come back. Gaara at this point was terrified, screaming at Naruto, "You will not end my existence." Naruto spoke softly, "I'm not going to end your existence, after all I know what you are going through." Gaara started clutching his head in denial, saying, "No you don't." Naruto shook his head, saying, "Yes I do, and I also know that you have people who care about you, and you have people who will prove your existence. You just have to let them in." He then extended his hand towards Gaara in order to help him up. Gaara took his hand with some trepidation and got up with Naruto's help as he noted, "Notice how your sand did not attack me. That's because it knows I mean you no harm right now." Gaara then asked quietly, "Which people already care about me?" Naruto happily responded, "Well, you got me, and then there are those two." Motioning his head towards the recently arrived Temari and Kankuro, who just looked on stunned. Gaara approached them and asked softly, "Is it true that you care about me?" Temari answered, "Yes, why wouldn't I?" Kankuro followed up saying, "We're here for you, little brother." Gaara then said, "Kankuro, Temari, let's go." They agreed and went off back towards their village. Naruto then went off towards his group saying, "Everyone all right?" To which everyone gave an affirmative nod before he smiled and then threw up as everyone raced towards him to see if he was alright. He held his hand up to stop them, saying, "That's what I get for using the Hiraishin so much." Before he threw up again. With their mission accomplished, the group headed back towards friendly lines to report to Kakashi the details of what had happened. After these events had taken place, the combined Tsunade invasion of Konoha had been defeated and the counterattack to retake the village had gone off without a hitch. By day's end the enemy would be driven out of Konoha. The cost for Konoha's shinobi had not been as high as previously feared, as about 19% of Konoha's total shinobi were dead or wounded compared to the projected cost of 30% of Konoha's total ninja force. There was also some good news. The orchestrator of the invasion and one of the village's biggest traitors, Orochimaru, was now dead. There was also the fact that most of the invasion force was now dead, wounded or captured. Estimates vary, but it was considered that Otto had lost 60% of its total forces in the invasion, while Suna had lost around 30% of its total forces, though about half of those lost for Suna were captured. However, with the good news also came the bad news, as while only about 19% of Konoha's total ninja force was dead or wounded, a large percent of those were sustained by the Anbu and Chunin Corps. And while yes, Orochimaru was dead, it had come at the cost of the life of Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage. When the news finally reached the villagers of what was the outcome of this invasion, they were jubilant, only for it to be cut short once they fully realized the true cost of this victory. A few days had passed since the invasion and Naruto was attending a funeral for the third Hokage. Gone temporarily was his bright orange jumpsuit, replaced with dark formal attire for the occasion. Naruto thought to himself sadly, "I still can't believe Gigi's gone." As he tried to repress the tears threatening to spill out, he looked at two of the third Hokage's family members to see how they were holding up. He saw Konohamaru crying and trying his best not to break down even more. Right next to Konohamaru was Asuma, who, while not openly crying, was clenching his fists tightly and had an obviously sad look and what seemed like regret in his eyes. He looked around to see his fellow shinobi's reactions. He saw Kurenai trying to comfort Asuma. He then saw Kakashi-sensei with a similar disposition to Asuma. He then looked at his fellow rookies and he saw Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji looking at their sensei with sad and worried expressions. Hinata was looking on in sadness, as was Kiba, while Shino looked expressionless at the proceedings. He looked to see Sasuke and Sakura looking at the ground, one looking like he had gone through this before, the other trying her best not to cry. He saw Team Guy looking on in silence and sadness, something that had it not been for the circumstances would have been a little unnerving. He then looked at his newest mentor Jeriah, who looked on with what looked like sad acceptance, though Naruto could also see his fists clenched in anger. He then looked at the person standing next to him, Iruka, as he asked his former teacher softly, "Sensei, why do people become shinobi if they know that this may be their end if they do?" Iruka then replied quietly, "People become shinobi to protect those close to them. We become shinobi so that we may have the strength to do so in spite of the dangers." Naruto nodded upon hearing Iruka's answer as the funeral went on and a eulogy was read out for the third Hokage. Naruto was only half paying attention as he just felt numb to everything around him. Around the time this was happening, Kabuto, Orochimaru's former right-hand man, was getting ready to escape because with the capture of many Otto ninja his role as a spy would be revealed. With the funeral going on, the village guard would be much lighter than it usually was and there would be less people seeing him head towards the gate, with so many people at the funeral making this the perfect time to escape. As he finished preparing his kit, he jumped towards the window as he thought to himself, "I will do what Orochimaru-sama couldn't and achieve immortality. I will be stronger than he ever was, and when I am, I'll burn this pathetic village to the ground." With that, he headed out towards the seemingly empty village, not to be seen by anyone in it for a long time. Iwagakure, shortly after the invasion of Konoha. News of the invasion of Konoha had not taken long to reach the village of Iwagakure, and one of the first to hear the news was the Tsuchikage, Onoki. Upon hearing the news, Onoki did not feel any joy or derive any happiness from it as some would expect. No, his thoughts were grim and sullen as he thought to himself, this could very well be the start of another war. And the very thought of war filled him with dread, because he knew that if war was to break out now, his village would not be ready for such a struggle. His thoughts about a potential war caused him to subconsciously think about how the last war had gone, and to a certain man, a man so fast that he cut down entire units in mere moments. A man who had single-handedly stopped an invasion consisting of 1,000 of his ninja, a man named Minato Namikaze. Contrary to popular belief, Onoki did not hate the man. He didn't like him for obvious reasons, but he couldn't hate the man for simply doing his duty. As he was reminiscing, one of his shinobi knocked on the door to his office. Onoki replied with a simple command of, "Come in." A shinobi that Onoki recognized as one of those who worked in the intelligence department of Iwa. The man bowed before pulling out a scroll and saying, "This is the most recent report about the state of Konoha and Suna from what our sources have been able to gather, Tsuchikage-sama." Onoki nodded and said to the man, "Very well, you may go now." The shinobi bowed before exiting the room. Onoki then took a look at the report, and at first what he saw didn't surprise him. Konoha had won the day and had inflicted heavy losses on Suna and Otto. They had captured a large but currently unknown number of prisoners, mostly from Suna, while sustaining surprisingly few casualties if the amount his intelligence had reported was accurate. What came next in the report did surprise him, as he learned that Hiruzen Sarutobi had managed to kill his traitorous student Orochimaru at the cost of his own life as he continued to read the report. What he read next almost caused him to drop the scroll in shock. There were rumors that one of the genin who had participated in the exam could perform the Hiraishin, though they were still gathering intel. It did say that these rumors were still being verified. To Onoki, this was something that could not wait. If there was someone else who could perform that infernal technique, he needed to know right away so that he could prepare for the potential repercussions. After all, he didn't need his ninja starting a war that his village could not win over an unfounded rumor. Kumogakure, around the same time. In Kumogakure, much like Iwa, news of the invasion of Konoha had reached the village relatively quickly, but unlike the Tsuchikage, the Fourth Hokage was thinking more of how his village could benefit from this and less the repercussions the Suna-Otto invasion would bring. His assistant Mabui said to him, "This is the information from our spies that you requested." A grinned before saying, "Good job, Mabui." Before he began reading the report, which was remarkably similar to the one Onoki received, before long he saw the part about a genin being able to perform the Hiraishin during the exams. "What?" A shouted before smashing his arm on his desk, breaking it. Mabui then sighed to herself, saying, "Guess I'll have to order another desk." As a thought to himself, "Another ninja who can use the Hiraishin. Guess I might have another person who can match my speed in the future." While I would like nothing more than to fight and possibly kill the genin who could use the Hiraishin himself, he knew that would be overkill in a cage. Attacking foreign shinobi unprovoked was the textbook definition of an act of war, but he still needed to get a read on this ninja's abilities so that his shinobi would know what he was capable of in case they ever had to fight him, and maybe even some justification for putting a genin in the bingo book. He then told Mabui, "Get me Yugito and her team as well as an extra squad of Chunin. I have a mission for them." A few days after the funeral, as Team 7 waited once again in irritation for their perpetually late sensei as they began to talk amongst themselves. "Stupid Kakashi-sensei making us wait." Naruto growled to himself before he got a devious idea as he started grinning. His other two teammates looked at him strangely. They were curious about what was making Naruto so happy, since he was usually pissed about Kakashi's tardiness. As said boy thought to himself, "One more prank wouldn't hurt, would it?" Completely oblivious to his teammates' looks. Eventually Sakura couldn't take the suspense anymore and said to him, "Naruto, why are you smiling? Kakashi is still late as hell." Sasuke nodded at this question in agreement. Naruto gave them a smile before saying, "What if I told you we might have a way to make Kakashi-sensei stop being late?" As Sasuke and Sakura's eyes widened at that momentarily before Sasuke scoffed, "Yeah, keep dreaming, Dobi." But Sakura, while skeptical, was a little curious, perhaps even a little hopeful, and asked, "How do you plan to do that, Naruto?" Naruto's grin turned evil at that question. "If you guys want to, we can prank him." Sasuke, while normally not one for such childishness, said, "Why not?" In his mind, the worst that could go wrong would be the prank not working, but if it did, at least Kakashi realizes why he shouldn't be late. As Sasuke let a small smile show, Sakura started grinning just as evilly as Naruto. "We'll show him what happens when he keeps showing up late." Naruto then looked to see what time it was and nodded when he saw that there was still an hour left before Kakashi usually showed up. Naruto then proceeded to tell them the plan. They began to shudder in both terror and excitement at how devious it was. Sasuke and Sakura were both terrified that Naruto had come up with a plan that seemed this evil, but were also grateful that they were never on the receiving end of one of his pranks. The plan was to use the transformation jutsu to look like and start acting in a similar fashion to Kakashi's self-proclaimed eternal rival, Mike Guy, and his student Rock Lee. They knew that it would at the very least get a reaction out of him if the previous encounters between the two of them had been any indication. There was just one miscalculation for this plan, and that's how big Kakashi's reaction would be. An hour later, Kakashi appeared at the training ground. He saw his students bunched up together talking to one another quietly, so he approached them quietly, though he noticed that they seemed to be wearing different clothes than the ones they normally wore. Kakashi just chalked it up to a wardrobe change. As he got closer and was about to touch Naruto's shoulder, his student turned his head quickly before saying cheerily, "Good afternoon, our most youthful sensei." As Naruto felt a little dizzy from saying the word youthful, Kakashi gave him an eye smile before saying, "Good afternoon, Naru." "What did you just say?" he finished fearfully as his lone eye squinted at his student. He then heard Sasuke say, "My most youthful teammate here wished you a good afternoon, sensei." He heard Sasuke say in the most positive tone he had ever heard from his broody student, while Sasuke internally was suppressing the urge to shiver after he said the word youthful. Kakashi at this point was more terrified than he had been in any previous fight as he asked mechanically, "What have you guys been up to?" This time it was Sakura who answered, shouting, "Guy-sensei showed us how to fan our flames of youth while we were waiting for you, Kakashi-sensei." Internally, Sakura resisted the urge to vomit when she said flames of youth. When Kakashi's students got up to face him, what he saw made his heart almost stop. All three of them were wearing that awful spandex suit that Guy had given Lee. The two boys among his students had a terrible bowl cut not unlike Guy and Lee's, and for all three of them their eyebrows somehow multiplied in size as Kakashi softly whispered to himself as his eyes started widening in horror. No, his three students then performed Guy's trademark, nice guy pose, giving their sensei a thumbs up and grinning at him as Kakashi subconsciously took a step back and started slowly shaking his head in denial while muttering to himself, "This can't be happening," acting like he had just witnessed a horrific murder. Naruto suppressed further smiling upon seeing Kakashi's reaction and thought to himself, "Now for the finishing blow." As he looked to his teammates and shouted, "Now let us celebrate our springtime of youth in the way Guy-sensei taught us." Upon saying that, he, Sasuke, and Sakura all started chanting, "Youth, youth, youth," as a sunset at the beach appeared out of nowhere behind them, with Kakashi looking on in abject horror as he thought to himself, "I failed them completely and utterly." As he then fell to his knees, eye gazing off into the distance. Upon seeing this, his students dropped their respective transformations as Sasuke smirked at him, trying to suppress a chuckle, Sakura giggling to herself at their sensei's misfortune, while Naruto was cackling at their sensei's state of shock while saying, "That's what you get for being late all the time, sensei." As Kakashi blinked at that remark as his eyes refocused on his students as he processed what Naruto had just said. He saw that his students were no longer in those hideous pieces of spandex that Guy dared to call clothes, and their hair and eyebrows were back to normal. Kakashi let out a sigh of relief that his students were not actually a part of the Guy's green spandex wearing cult of youth. Internally he was impressed at their teamwork, but he was also more than a little miffed that they pulled a stunt like that on him. As he was going to counter their prank with some tortuous exercises, he heard someone say, "Alright, you brats had your fun." Team 7 looked to see Jeriah approaching before saying, "Kakashi, you and your team are going to be accompanying me on an important mission." As the three of the students looked at the Sannin in surprise as Kakashi asked professionally, "What is our objective?" Jeriah said, "I'll tell you guys after we get on the road. Meet me at the main gate in 1 hour." They nodded and went to pack their gear. Before Team 7 knew it, they were out the gates with Jeriah. Once they were out of sight of the village, Jeriah told them what their mission was, saying, "We are to find the next Hokage on the orders of the daimyo." As the genin's eyes widened at that piece of news, after all, this mission should at least count as an A- rank. They could also see why they would keep such a mission under wraps. If the other villages learned who the future Hokage might be, then would probably try to assassinate them in order to deprive the village of good leadership, or if they had the resources and manpower, attempt hold them captive to extort the village. Though he could understand why. Most genin would normally not be included in such a mission, and originally they weren't. It was supposed to be just him and Naruto, but after what happened to his teacher he decided to include Sasuke so he could possibly gauge how much of a flight risk the kid was. As while he trusted Kakashi's opinion as a shinobi, he also believed that the months-old friendship with Obito clouded his judgment when it came to Sasuke, and Jiraiya refused to allow another Orochimaru to happen if he could prevent it, but the problem included in that line of thinking was that Kakashi would never agree to that without being allowed to go on the mission himself, and that meant not including Sakura would look suspicious since genin teams were supposed to act as a unit, so in the end he just decided to take the whole of Team 7. While on the road, Kakashi and Jiraiya began training Team 7 in covering some of their weaknesses as well as helping them learn some new skills. One of the first orders of business was to test Sasuke's and Sakura's chakra affinity, as he had already tested Naruto's. When he gave them the chakra paper, the two of them already knew what this piece of paper was. Sasuke put his chakra in it first and his paper crumpled and then burned. Then it was Sakura's turn, her paper soaked up then crumbled. So we got a fire and lightning and a water and earth affinity. Not bad, at least they both have an affinity that I know well. Jiraiya thought upon seeing what affinities Kakashi's other two students had. Jiraiya then said, "Alright, now that we got that out of the way, I want to know both of your current skill sets so I know what we're working with and what we have to work on." Sasuke said, "I know the 3 fire-style techniques: the Fireball Jutsu, the Phoenix Flower Jutsu, and the Dragon Flame Jutsu. I also know the Chidori." Jiraiya then looked to Sakura. Sakura said, "I don't know any jutsu outside the ones we learned at the academy." Feeling embarrassed about herself, Jiraiya then smiled and said, "No need to feel ashamed of yourself, Sakura. That skill set is what I am aiming to help you fix." Although internally Jiraiya was more than a little annoyed at Kakashi, thinking, "Geez, Kakashi playing favorites much." As he gave Kakashi a look as the masked shinobi who at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Jiraiya then debated mentally on what he should help them train on in the limited time he had with them. He then decided, saying, "Naruto, I want you to work with Kakashi on learning a certain jutsu I have for you." Naruto grinned at that as Jiraiya then looked at Sasuke. "You will be working with me on chakra control and a basic fire-style jutsu." As Sasuke nodded, finally he looked at Sakura and said, "You will also be working with me on expanding your chakra reserves and some genjutsu." The 3 of them nodded before Jiraiya and Kakashi told them the exercises they would do on the road. Naruto would be working on the jutsu that Jiraiya had given him by trying to burst a water balloon with his chakra, with Kakashi giving the occasional tip. Sasuke was doing the kunai spinning exercise for his chakra control and consistently trying not to get his hand impaled by said kunai, with Jiraiya snickering at his constant failures, as both Kakashi and Jiraiya had made it abundantly clear that he would not be allowed to learn the jutsu before completing this exercise. Sakura was working on increasing her current chakra reserves by constantly expelling chakra out of her body until she reached a certain level before resting and starting the whole process happen again. She was also working on the false surroundings genjutsu by casting it on her teammates in an attempt to make them go in the wrong direction whenever Jiraiya or Kakashi gave her a discreet signal. That worked a few times when Naruto or Sasuke walked face first into a tree that they did not see, much to the amusement of Kakashi and Jiraiya. As Jiraiya and Team 7 reached the town of Tanzakugai where they were supposed to meet the new Hokage, Naruto asked Jiraiya, "By the way, who is supposed to be the new Hokage anyway, Ero Sennin?" Jiraiya replied cryptically, "My old teammate." This remark flew over the genins' heads, but Kakashi nodded in understanding about who Jiraiya was talking about. As Jiraiya led the group towards a casino, Naruto angrily shouted at the man, "No way in hell am I letting you use my money for gambling again." As his other 2 teammates started glaring at the Sannin, thinking that was what the man had intended. Jiraiya shouted at Naruto, "That was one-time, brat." Naruto instantly retorted, "Yeah, and I have no interest in letting that happen again." Jiraiya huffed before saying, "No, we are not gambling. If what my spy had said is correct, then she should be here." As the genin looked at him incredulously, after all the places they had expected to find the new Hokage, this would be the last place they had expected to find them as Jiraiya and Kakashi entered. They then shrugged as they entered as well. At that moment a blonde-haired woman just won the jackpot, and unlike how most people would react by cheering, all she felt was dread as the woman accompanying her said, "Tsunade-sama, this amazing, we could pay off your debts with this." The now identified Tsunade said sternly, Shizune, we are leaving right now. As she turned to leave only to come face to face Jeriah and his group. She then thought to herself, well shit. Outside Tanzaku Gai, a blonde Jonin and her genin team from Kumo approached the town. She sighed with some relief after all they had to abandon the Chunin squad accompanying them in order to complete their most recent mission. She hoped they would survive, but she knew it was pretty unlikely after all, since their two opponents were Kisame Hoshigaki and Itachi Uchiha, and with the difference between the two groups' power levels meant that there was little the Chunin could do except stall for time. She then shook her head and told her team what to do as she said, "We are to split up and look for Naruto Uzumaki." As she handed them a photo of their target, she then warned, "Do not engage him on your own, tell the rest of us immediately if you spot him." With that, the three genin nodded before saying, "Hi Yugito-sensei." Before they split up to complete their orders, leaving their sensei to think about the orders. The Raikage. Their orders were to kill or capture Naruto Uzumaki, but the more she thought about it, the more those orders didn't make sense. After all, if the Raikage wanted Uzumaki dead, then wouldn't Kumo's Enbu be better suited to that task, and why send genin? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like something wasn't right. Yugito then shook her head once again, as while she didn't understand her orders, she also understood that she had to follow through with them no matter what. Well shit, Tsunade thought to herself upon seeing Jeriah and his group. As she knew that her teammate was not just here to say hello, if the fact that he had brought Kakashi and some brats with him was any indication. Jeriah said to her, "Hello Tsunade-hime, how have you been?" Tsunade said irritably, "Cut the crap Jeriah. I know you're not just here to catch up. If sensei wanted something he would have sent an Anbu." As Jiraiya's group looked down sadly at the mention of the deceased Hokage. Jeriah then explained, about that, as he tried to figure out a way to break to her, but then decided not to sugarcoat it as he finished, "Sensei is dead." He finished sadly. While Tsunade had heard about the attack on Konoha by Suna and Otto, the news that her sensei was dead was something she had not heard yet. How did it happen? She couldn't help but ask as a sad look appeared on her face. Jeriah said, "He used the Reaper Death Seal fighting Orochimaru and sealed away himself, the snake, and Hashirama, who the bastard revived with Edo Tensei." As Tsunade's expression darkened upon hearing her grandfather's name, she then asked, "Why are you here then? I doubt you came all this way just to tell me this." As Jeriah sighed upon hearing this before saying, "We want you to become the next Hokage." Seemingly dreading the answer, the three genin among the group looked on in anticipation. There was no way she would turn down a chance to become Hokage, right? That was their thinking until Tsunade rejected it flatly, "I refuse." As the three genin looked on incredulously, but who could blame them? After all, there were many who had tried and failed to gain the Hokage's position, so for them it just didn't seem possible that someone might reject it. That might have been the end of the conversation, but Naruto then asked, "Why won't you?" Tsunade replied, "Because it's a fool's dream. Unlike money, life is not traded so cheaply." As if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Naruto gritted his teeth but held his tongue at that statement before Tsunade continued, "Only a fool would take the Hokage's position." This was a step too far in Naruto's eyes, as in his anger, he went to try and punch her only to be held back by Jeriah as he shouted, "Let me go Ero Sennin, who does this old hag think she is disrespecting the Hokage?" As Jeriah sighed at his student's antics, Tsunade then asked irritated, "Who's the brat Jeriah?" Looking at her old teammate as Naruto shouted at her while still being held back by Jeriah. "The name's Naruto Uzumaki, believe it." Tsunade then said condescendingly, "Well, he's falls short of your last apprentice." Jeriah simply replied, "Well, it's hard for anyone to match the fourth Hokage." As he finally let down Naruto, who had calmed down enough that he wouldn't do anything rash, though he was still glaring at Tsunade along with his teammates, as while they didn't know the third Hokage or any Hokage really like Naruto did, they had enough respect for those who took the position and those who had served the village in that role that they wouldn't stand for someone disrespecting them. Tsunade then decided to say one more thing, "Even the fourth Hokage died a fool." At that remark, even Kakashi was glaring at her alongside the genin as Naruto then said, shaking his head, "Come on Ero Sennin, this washed-up old hag isn't fit to be Hokage." Tsunade's eye twitched at that remark but didn't say anything until Sasuke decided to add his 2 cents, saying, "So this is the last of my clan's great rival. I honestly can't say I'm impressed." Staring her down with his Sharingan, At this statement Tsunade said lowly, "You brats want to take this outside." Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other before nodding as Naruto said, "Bring it." Sakura tried to de-escalate the situation saying to her teammates, "Come you two, she isn't worth it." As Tsunade apparently took offense to that saying, "I'll take all three of you on." As Shizune asked, "Tsunade-sama, isn't that a little excessive?" in an attempt to calm her teacher down. Tsunade, instead of replying to her, instead walked outside the bar with Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura following suit as the other adults could only sigh exasperatedly. Outside the casino, Tsunade taunted the three saying, "I bet you won't even be able to land one hit on me even if I only use one finger." Sasuke taunted back with a smirk, "A little presumptuous that you think we won't be able to land one hit. If you're lucky, you'll only get hit once." As Kakashi could only put his face into his palm and sighed out, "Unbelievable," before rubbing his temples at his genin team's recklessness. Unbeknownst to either party, they had someone watching from afar. This someone was wearing a cloak that covered most of their features, but two things were discernible. One, they had dark red hair. Two, the more identifying feature was a Kumo headband. The figure got up and ran off in a different direction, the only thought in their mind being, "I have to tell Yugito-sensei." As they raced off towards Yugito, however, due to their position on the building they were watching from, they only saw Tsunade and the three genin, not Kakashi, Jiraiya or Shizune. Back at the casino, Tsunade and the three genin were finishing up glaring at each other when Naruto decided to make the first move and threw a kunai at Tsunade, who dodged it with ease. Naruto along with Sasuke charged at her kunai in hand as Sakura threw some shuriken over their heads to keep Tsunade busy as their opponent lazily dodged the shuriken she threw. Naruto and Sasuke finally closed the distance enough to attempt to strike Tsunade, only for her to point towards Naruto's head and flick as the force generated created a small dust cloud as Sasuke and Sakura looked on in shock. Expecting to see an unconscious Naruto laying once the dust cleared, Tsunade said smugly, "That'll teach the brat about disrespecting me." However, upon the dust settling, the two sides' expressions switched when they did not see an unconscious Naruto as Sasuke and Sakura began to smile and Tsunade looked on in shock. Tsunade then had to dodge a barrage of shuriken from Sasuke as Tsunade was still trying to figure out where Naruto had gone off to. She got her answer, in the form of an incomplete Rasengan to her back courtesy of Naruto, who had used the Hiraishin to get out of the way of Tsunade's attack and sneak up behind her. The jutsu at this level could incapacitate most Chunin if aimed correctly. Unfortunately for the three genin, Tsunade was way past Chunin level as she used her fist to punch Naruto in the gut, who then fell to the ground clutching his stomach. Tsunade then with great speed punched Sasuke into the ground, knocking him out before she went over to Sakura, who attempted to throw some more shuriken and kunai at her in an attempt to defend herself. Tsunade grabbed one of the kunai mid-air and used the blunt end to knock Sakura out. Just as Tsunade was about to gloat, she heard Naruto groaning behind her. As she looked behind her, she saw Naruto attempting to get up. She said to him, "Don't, you'll only make your injuries worse." Naruto still got up anyway before coughing out, "This isn't over yet and I'm pretty sure you used more than one finger." Tsunade was secretly impressed because she used enough force to incapacitate a high-level Chunin, and here was a genin who was still able to stand after taking that level of punishment. Not that she would admit it. She then asked him, "Why are you so determined to win this fight?" Naruto replied, "Because it's my dream to become Hokage." Tsunade recoiled a little upon hearing this, as an image of a brown-haired boy followed quickly by an image of a long white-haired man overlapped over Naruto as she stared in disbelief at him. Naruto quickly used her distraction to his advantage as he quickly threw a kunai with a Hiraishin tag at her. Tsunade caught this kunai on instinct. When she did, however, Naruto used the Hiraishin to appear right next to her, another incomplete Rasengan in hand as he went to strike Tsunade in the side with it. However, she grabbed his wrist as he attempted to do so and threw him over her shoulder and onto the ground. As Naruto attempted to get up again, she said to him, "You attempted to use the Rasengan on me again, didn't you?" Naruto replied, "Yeah, what of it?" Tsunade then said, "Let's make a bet then." He asked her, "What kind of bet?" Tsunade took a quick breath before saying, "If you can master the Rasengan within a week, then I'll come back and be Hokage. If you lose, however, I not only get all the money in your wallet, you'll also give up your dream of being Hokage. Deal?" Naruto, while unsure about potentially giving up his dream, said, "Deal." After saying that, Tsunade then went to heal Naruto and his teammates, only to freeze when Naruto coughed up some blood. Tsunade froze up, and then robotically she turned to Shizune and asked her, "Heal them please." As she walked away a little paler than usual as her student got to work healing the three genin, with Jeriah quickly paying for the damages before going off to make sure she didn't do something stupid. Elsewhere in Tanzaku Gai, after one of her students had confirmed that their target was here, Yugito was with her three students as they finished planning out how to complete their mission. "So have you three memorized the plan?" she asked her students to make doubly sure that few things could go wrong as possible. "Hi Yugito-sensei," the three of them said before nodding at Yugito. Yugito looked confidently at her students. After all, even if they were still genin, they should be able to complete this mission since they all had a decent amount of experience under their belts. She was confident that her students would be able to complete this mission. That confidence, however, was about to be shaken by one of her students' combination of overactive imagination and pessimism. Said student, a boy who had dark skin and white hair, said, "What if our target manages to kill us and capture Yugito-sensei? Then Konoha creates a new Jinchuriki and declares war on Kumo, and as a result the Raikage is captured in battle and execute, only for a fist to crash into his head followed by a yell of, 'Damn it Omoi, stop doing that.'" As Omoi groaned in pain and looked at his teammate, Waikarui, he complained as his teammate, who had a similar complexion and dark red hair, said, "When you stop doing that I'll stop hitting you." As the two of them got into an argument, Yugito's third student, a girl with blonde hair, pale skin and a large chest, said calmly, "Would you two stop fighting? It's not cool." As Yugito decided to step in, saying, "You two should listen to Samui." As said student smiled while her two teammates ceased their arguing. After that the three of them went off to start preparing for tomorrow when they would complete their mission. Yugito, while grateful that the argument was over, couldn't help but think that something was going to go wrong tomorrow, like she had forgotten to take into account one or more factors in the plan. While she didn't discard that possibility, she mostly thought that thinking was due to nerves as she went for a walk to calm herself down. Back with Kakashi's team and Shizune. As Shizune finished healing an unconscious Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura after their ordeal, Kakashi said to her, "Thank you." Shizune shook her head and said to Kakashi, "It's no problem," before saying, "Have them get some rest and they should be good as new." Kakashi, who had noticed Tsunade's aversion to blood, couldn't help but ask Shizune, "Does Tsunade have hemophobia?" Shizune sighed at Kakashi's observation but answered, "Yes, Lady Tsunade has had hemophobia ever since the death of her lover." Kakashi nodded upon hearing this as Shizune then noticed that Jeriah wasn't with them and asked Kakashi, "Where is Jeriah?" Kakashi told her, he went off to pay for the damages of that fight and is now trying to make sure Tsunade doesn't do something dumb, as well as tell her the rest of what has happened to Konoha during the invasion. Shizune sighed in relief at the fact that someone was looking out for her teacher while she was healing these three genin, though she did have some questions of her own for Kakashi about these genin, as she asked, "So this is your genin team? Last I heard that you had yet to pass one?" Kakashi answered her question saying, none of the teams before them had ever recognized the true meaning of the test. He then continued, "They recognized the true meaning of the test and passed as a result." Shizune then had a question pertaining to Kakashi's pink-haired genin, Sakura, if she remembered correctly, as she asked, "What does Sakura specialize in?" From the looks of it, Sasuke specializes in ninjutsu, as does Naruto, who also uses fuinjutsu. So what's Sakura's role on this team? Kakashi looked down before admitting, "Right now Sakura doesn't have a specialization on this team, and admittedly I have failed to do much to correct that." Shizune was about to ask what Kakashi meant by that before the two of them heard a groan. As they turned their heads to the source, they saw that Sakura was getting up while rubbing her head. Kakashi asked his student, "Are you alright, Sakura?" At that she said, "Other than my aching head I'm fine." She then asked Shizune, "You know Iryojutsu, correct?" Shizune nodded before Sakura asked her, "Do you think you could teach me how to use Iryojutsu, please?" Shizune didn't see any reason why she couldn't teach her, though she looked at Kakashi for approval, who simply said, "I don't see any reason why she can't. She has some of the best chakra control I have ever seen for someone her age, and she is incredibly intelligent as well." Shizune nodded before asking Sakura, "Why do you want to learn Iryojutsu?" Sakura answered without any hesitation, Because I'm tired of being useless. I'm tired of not being able to help my teammates in any way and I want to change that. Shizune nodded in approval and said, "Very well, we start tomorrow, but for now get some rest." As Sakura nodded before going to sleep once again and Shizune went off to find her teacher. The day after, in a clearing just outside Tanzaku-gai. A day had passed since Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke had been defeated single-handedly by Tsunade and the three of them were training hard. Naruto was currently using 30 shadow clones to assist himself in learning the Rasengan. Sasuke was now working on the fire jutsu that Jiraiya had given him, fire style. Smoke cloud, with Kakashi giving them pointers as well as any assistance they would need, and Sakura was working with Shizune to do a basic exercise before she learned any Iryojutsu. The exercise was to separate a mixed pile of multicolored sand and separate them into their own individual colored piles within a time limit. Naruto was currently trying to finish the third stage of the Rasengan, though he was incredibly frustrated. After all, he had gotten the first and second stages relatively easily. The third stage of the jutsu was when the user attempted to stabilize the jutsu by containing it. But it seemed containing the jutsu wasn't nearly as easy. As Naruto sat down in order to rest and think about what he was doing wrong, he and his group didn't notice some figures hiding in the trees near the clearing. In the tree line near the clearing, Yugito and her team were waiting for their chance to kill Naruto as quickly as possible and then make a getaway before his companions could catch them, though the chances of that were becoming less and less likely. After all, the longer they stayed in hiding, the higher the chances got of them getting caught before they could conduct the attack. It also didn't help that one of what looked like two Jonin-level shinobi was Kakashi Hitaki. There was also the chance that those Akatsuki guys would show up again if they stayed here too long. Yugito made her decision. She and her team would strike now. As she prepared to give her team the signal, she heard a voice that had been strangely silent as of late. The voice said, "Kitten, be careful, that Genin houses my brother." Yugito asked her mentally, "So he's a Jinchuriki like me? Is that why you have been unusually quiet as of late, Matabi?" The now named Matabi said, "Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying." Yugito was about to mentally reply when she noticed Naruto looking in her direction before he ran off towards the center of the clearing, towards his companions. As Matabi told Yugito, "Looks like Kurama told him of my presence and by extension yours." At that, Yugito acted quickly as she fired off a fire-style mouse hairball. After she had done that, a mouse made of blue fire raced past Naruto before exploding right in front of him as Omoi, Karui, and Samui raced towards Naruto in order to cut him down before his companions could intervene. Naruto wasted no time as he threw a kunai with a Hiraishin tag at Samui, though she dodged by moving to the side. As Naruto, realizing that he would have to fight it out, pulled out two kunai and prepared to fight off his attackers until the others could back him up. As Naruto's two kunai clashed with Omoi and Karui's swords, he realized his fatal mistake, as he was in a similar situation to the one he put Neji in during the Chunin exams, where he had to defend himself on all sides and couldn't let up for a second lest his opponents get the upper hand and kill him. As Samui was finally upon him, kunai in hand, ready to finish him, when he heard a shout of, "Dobi, get out of the way." Naruto looked to see a fireball heading his way. He used the Hiraishin to get to the kunai he had thrown at Samui earlier. Omoi and Karui quickly used the substitution jutsu to swap places with sticks in the clearing, while Samui got hit in the shoulder by the fireball. As Samui screamed in pain, Karui raced to her side in order to get her teammate away from the enemy. As Karui looked at her comrade's injuries, which luckily for her didn't hit anything vital, but she was badly burned in the shoulder. As Karui attempted to drag her teammate away, she had to dodge several shuriken that had been thrown by Sakura, who had brought Shizune and Kakashi with her. Kakashi had already his Sharingan and was readying a jutsu, while Shizune had put herself between Sasuke and Naruto and the Kumo team. Yugito realized that her gamble had failed, so she needed to get her team out of here quickly. So she fired off more mouse hairballs as four flaming mice made their way towards Naruto and Sasuke, intent on killing them. Sasuke and Naruto threw kunai at the burning mice, managing to hit them, causing them to explode. This bought Yugito time as she raced towards Samui in an attempt to get her student away from the Konoha ninjas, only to have to break off her rescue attempt in order to dodge a Chidori from Kakashi. Kakashi then asked Yugito, "What are Kumo ninja doing this deep inside Hai no Kuni?" Yugito was about to tell Kakashi to go to hell when a voice cut her off, saying, "I believe I can answer that question." Both sides turned to see the source of the voice as they saw who it was. To the Konoha's team's shock and the Kumo team's terror, the source of the voice was Itachi Uchiha, and he was accompanied by a blue-skinned man with what looked like a shaking sword on his back. Both were wearing black cloaks with red clouds on them. Sasuke began to seethe with rage at the sight of his older brother as Naruto and Sakura looked at their teammate worriedly. Kakashi, Shizune and Yugito, who were at each other's throats a moment ago, now had their attention solely on the two Akatsuki members. Karui and Omoi, taking advantage of the Konoha shinobi's distraction, put themselves between the two S-rank shinobi and Samui. Itachi then answered Kakashi's earlier question by saying, they were here to kill Naruto. As his companion remarked, so these are the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi and the Nibi, let's hope they put up more of a fight than those Chunin did. As the blue-skinned man grinned, displaying his shark-like teeth. They were here to kill Naruto. Itachi answered Kakashi's earlier question, though Yugito was wondering how they got that information if they just arrived here, asking them, having a bad feeling about what had happened to their Chunin companions. Where did you get that information? The blue-skinned man answered her question saying, those Chunin accompanying you weren't so tough when Itachi here put him in a genjutsu. Before continuing with a sadistic grin, they didn't even put up much of a fight. Were those guys really what counts for Chunin these days? Itachi glared at and reprimanded his companion saying, that's enough, Kisame. He didn't want his partner to give away too much of his abilities. While the Kumo team glared at the two of them for Kisami's insults. Kakashi said to them, you told us why they are here, motioning his head towards the Kumo team, but then continued asking, but why are you here? Hoping to glean some information from the two criminals as he prepared the summoning jutsu in order to summon his ninkin to deliver a message to Jeriah for backup. Kisame said mockingly to Kakashi, I don't see what use that information is going to be to you, seeing as you'll be dead soon. But decided to humor Kakashi before Itachi could intervene, saying, we're here for the Kyuubi and the Nibi. As Kakashi had to stop himself from flinching upon hearing this. Now known they were after Naruto and most likely one of the Kumo ninja, as he said seriously to their opponents, well, you certainly aren't going to be taking either. With that said, Kakashi summoned his ninkin and told them, find Jeriah and Tsunade, tell them that we need backup and bring them here. As the 8 ninkin scattered in different directions in order to complete their task. Itachi attempted to intercept the ninkin by throwing shuriken at them, but the shuriken were intercepted by shuriken thrown by Kakashi, as Itachi then had to dodge a strike from the one-eyed shinobi as his opponent looked at him, though was trying his best to not look into his eyes. As Kakashi was about to attempt another attack on Itachi, he had to dodge an attack from Kisami's massive sword that was wriggling. As Yugito, who had a theory of who exactly their second opponent was, raced through hand seals before firing off a fire-style fireball jutsu at Kisame with the peculiar trait that instead of the normal red fireball, this fireball was blue and easily twice the size of a normal one. Kisame simply smirked and positioned his sword so that the teeth were facing the fireball. As soon as the fireball looked like it would connect, the sword ate the fireball, as this action confirmed Yugito's theory of who this man was, as she said who her opponent was aloud. Kisame Hoshigaki, the tailless Biju. The man stated to her, grinning, looks like someone did their homework. As he put his hands into a hand seal before performing the jutsu water style. Exploding water colliding wave. At that he spat out a giant wave of water, as Kakashi wasted no time going through hand seals before using his earth style mud wall jutsu. As he slammed his hands onto the ground, a large wall of earth rose in front of him, his team, and the others with him. As the wave crashed into the wall of earth, it began to crack but finally receded without breaking it. When Kakashi then went to look at his opponents over the wall of earth, he quickly had to duck his head down to dodge some shuriken thrown by Itachi, as he thought to himself, I hope Jeriah and Tsunade get here soon. With Jeriah and Tsunade. Jeriah was currently drinking sake with Tsunade as he told her what had happened in Konoha in her absence, while Tsunade, who was normally not one to take interest in village affairs, was listening intently at what was going on in her old home. As he was about to tell her more about the village, a dog Jeriah recognized as one of Kakashi's ninkin ran towards him. Without missing a beat, the ninkin said to Jeriah, Kakashi and Shizune need backup. They're being attacked by the Akatsukis Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki. As Jeriah along with Tsunade stood up, as he said, take me to them now. The ninkin nodded before leading them to where Kakashi and his group were. Back in the clearing outside Tanzaku Gai. Kakashi, Shizune and Yugito were still fighting Itachi and Kisame while the genin looked on in frustration as they could only watch the sheer power level difference between them and the Akatsuki members fighting the three Jonin. As Kakashi and Yugito fought head-to-head against Itachi and Kisame with Shizune supporting either of them by throwing poison-coated senbon at their opponents as she couldn't use her poison mist technique without risk of hitting Yugito or Kakashi. The genin could only look on and curse their own powerlessness in this situation as they Kakashi used the mud wall technique to block off another wave of water from Kisame. Sasuke was about to step in to help when Naruto shot out his arm to stop him. Sasuke looked angrily at Naruto and said to him, "We need to help them, Dobi." Naruto instantly replied, "And how would we do that? This fight is way beyond our level." As they saw Yugito narrowly dodge a strike from Kisame as Naruto continued, "The best help we can provide them right now is to stay out of their way." As Kakashi had to dodge another fireball headed his way. But Naruto wasn't finished as he said to his fellow genin, "Although if I were you guys I'd ready a jutsu, just in case we need to step in." As he readied one of his Hiraishin kunai and performed some hand seals, Sasuke smirked and raced through hand seals as well in order to ready a fireball jutsu. Sakura readied some kunai and shuriken, as Omoi and Karui readied their attacks. The genin then stood by ready to attack the moment it was needed. They wouldn't have to wait for long. Yugito was struggling in her fight against Itachi as she and Kakashi switched opponents again with Kakashi now taking on Kisame as the two of them struggled against their respective opponents. While their opponents had landed a few blows on them, it was nothing they couldn't handle, however their opponents had yet to be hit and nothing seemed to work. Yugito then performed another mouse hairball jutsu as 10 flaming mice raced towards Kisame. Kisame for his part only grinned before with a quick swipe of his sword the flaming mice dispersed as Samahata appeared to be eating the chakra. Yugito then mentally asked her Biju, "Hey Matabi, got any ideas on how to beat this guy?" Matabi then replied, "In all honesty kitten, I don't have a clue on how to win this fight other than to stall for time until reinforcements arrive. After all, this is the worst possible opponent for a ninjutsu expert like yourself." Yugito then asked Matabi, "What makes you think reinforcements are going to come? We are deep inside Hai no Kuni, far away from where any Kumo ninja operate." Matabi then told Yugito as her container dodged a shark made of water before firing off another blue fireball. "Who said those reinforcements would be Kumo shinobi? After all, didn't you see that Kakashi guy had sent his ninkin somewhere? That obviously means that there are shinobi who can fight alongside us or nearby." As Yugito resigned herself to the fact there was little chance she would get out of this mission uncaptured by either the Akatsuki or Konoha. Yugito was broken from her thoughts as Matabi shouted at her, "Kitten, watch out." As she was forced to dodge a strike from Kisame only for her opponent to smirk as he quickly struck her with his sword, sending her tumbling to the ground in pain. With Kakashi and Shizune looking on helplessly as they tried to fend off Itachi and get to Yugito. Kisame then went to strike Yugito down only for Itachi to remind him, "Remember Kisame, we need her alive." As Kisame grunted before grinning saying, Yeah, but I'm pretty sure Leader Sama won't mind her missing a few limbs." Brandishing Samahata, he made his way towards her to finish her off. Yugito tried to move, but the moment she did, pain shot through her midsection as she winced in pain. She thought to herself, "Shit, did that last attack break something?" As she looked on helplessly as Kisame got closer and closer, just as he was about to reach her, he suddenly jumped to the side to avoid a fireball heading towards him. Then he had to duck to avoid 2 lightning bolts aimed at his head. Just as Kisame thought the coast was clear, he felt a presence behind him. He swiped Samahata to his back in order to attack whoever was behind him, only to see Naruto just outside of his sword's range as Naruto slammed his palms onto the ground and 2 spears of earth shot out in Kisami's direction, forcing him further back in order to dodge. As Kisame came to a stop, he heard the telltale hissing noise of an explosive tag which forced him to jump back to where he had started his rush towards Yugito. Kisame thought to himself, "These genin actually forced me back. Not bad, they might actually put up a decent fight after all." As he started grinning once more, putting the genin on edge, he then slowly made his way towards the genin, as said genin readied for another attack. Just as it seemed there was going to be another fight about to break out, a stream of fire raced towards Kisame, forcing him to dodge. As Kakashi and Shizune let out a sigh of relief knowing that their backup had finally arrived. Everyone looked to see who had done it, and there they saw Jeriah along with Tsunade ready for a fight. Upon seeing them, Itachi plainly told Kisame, "We're leaving." Kisame, while not normally one to back down from a fight, realized that there was no way they could win and thus begrudgingly complied. They then retreated as Sasuke was clenching his fists tightly in anger, once again cursing his own weakness and seeing once again the difference in power between him and Itachi. As Sasuke was looking off into nowhere in anger, he failed to see his two teammates looking at him worriedly. Jeriah saw Sasuke's reaction to Itachi retreating and mentally sighed as he could feel a headache coming on, thinking to himself, "Man, Itachi, you really did a number on your little brother." As he thought about his spy within the Akatsuki, and though he wouldn't admit it aloud, he was scared about what would happen if the truth behind the Uchiha massacre were to be revealed, what the youngest Uchiha's reaction would be. As this was going on, Tsunade went about healing Yugito and Samui, the latter of whom finally came to after the fight was over, albeit in a bit of pain, while Shizune looked over the others' injuries. Luckily, the only other person with any halfway serious injuries was Kakashi, who had depleted his chakra reserves as well as sustaining a few cuts and lacerations while fighting Itachi. As he was being healed by Shizune, Kakashi found that his thoughts kept going to his earlier fight with Itachi and Kisame and how badly that fight could have gone if Jeriah, as well as how much weaker he had gotten since his Anbu days and how much he had failed as a sensei so far. He resolved to fix both of those mistakes. Unknown to Kakashi, he wasn't the only one who went over the previous fight, as his three students were all rerunning the fight in their heads, and all three of them had reached the same conclusion: they had to get stronger. As Tsunade finished healing Yugito and Samui, Jeriah went over to the Kumo team. This sent them on edge as they thought he wanted to capture them, but he did his best to dispel those fears. Jeriah was mentally debating whether or not he should capture the Kumo team. After all, if what Itachi was true, their objective was to kill his student, and their actions prior to this fight, from what Kakashi had told him, had confirmed this. While it was tempting to capture this team to send a message that could potentially spark a war between Konoha and Kumo, so he decided against it. Though Jeriah decided to tell the Kumo team that they should leave by tomorrow, as afterwards the Konoha ninja would have to capture them due to reinforcements from Konoha being here by then. Yugito sighed in relief that she and her team would not become prisoners of Konoha, though that would sadly also mean she would have to tell the Raikage that their mission was a failure, and she was not looking forward to that. Well, whatever punishment her leader had in store for her and her team, she could think on later, as she told her team, "Make sure you are ready to leave by tomorrow afternoon." As she thought to herself, "I need a drink," as she prepared for a headache given to her courtesy of this mission. Unbeknownst to all in the clearing, a shadowy figure had seen the whole thing and was now off to report their findings with only one thought on their minds: "I have to tell Tsuchikage-sama." As they ran off in the direction of Iwagakure, intent on delivering the information they had gathered. Back in Tanzaku-gai, later that day, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura sat down in the inn their team and Jeriah were currently staying at, completely exhausted. They began to talk amongst themselves about the earlier fight. Naruto started off trying to break the ice. "Man, that fight was intense." As Sakura agreed, admitting, "I really thought we were going to die before Jeriah and Tsunade showed up." Sasuke said, "I honestly have to agree that if that fight lasted longer and Jeriah and Tsunade hadn't showed up when they did, I think one of us would have been killed or worse." As his two teammates looked at him incredulously, but who could blame them? Here was the Sasuke Uchiha admitting weakness. As Naruto pointed his finger at Sasuke and shouted, "Who are you and what have you done with the real Sasuke?" As Sasuke gained a tick mark on his head before shouting back, "What do you mean, Dobi? Of course I'm the real me." Naruto instantly retorted, "The Sasuke I know, while my friend is still an arrogant bastard who won't admit weakness." As Sakura tried her best to break up the argument by asking the question, "Where is Kakashi-sensei?" The two boys broke off their argument as Naruto told her, "I think he said he was going into town, I think." Sakura nodded before looking down as she asked her two teammates, "Do you guys think I'm useless?" As they heard this question, her two teammates looked at her in concern as Sasuke asked, "What brought about this question?" As Sakura started tearing up, saying, "It's just that I haven't been able to do much in these past few fights, and you two are so much stronger than me." As Naruto tried to encourage her by saying, "That's not true, Sakura. You were a big help in the fight against the Ichibi." As Sakura shook her head before saying shakily, but all I did was help set up a trap. As Sasuke offered his own words of encouragement telling her, the Dobi is right, sometimes helping can make all the difference. Sakura, and not to mention you learned that genjutsu relatively quickly, besides even if you are weak now it doesn't mean you can't become strong. As Sakura smiled softly at her teammates before saying to them, yeah, you guys are right. As she wiped away her tears ready to train hard with her teammates tomorrow. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.